feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie podcast. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Happy New Year, Matt.
Happy New Year to you too, buddy. Yes, it is 2025. I don't know where the fucking time goes. We are a quarter way through this century, Eric. Well, not really. I guess at the end of this year would be a quarter way through.
If we make it to the end of this year, let's just say that.
Oh God, don't say that. My health anxiety's coming back to. Never mind. Yeah, today we are. We're gonna do the next couple weeks are going to be really fun because this is kind of, I love the fresh start of a new year, both in, personal lives, but in the podcast, I love it because we get to do our best of the year as well as our most anticipated films of the upcoming year. Two of my favorite episodes to do. I love reflecting back on the years past to talk about all the movies we saw, some stuff we love, some stuff that we forgot even came out, and everything in between. So on today's episode, Eric and I will be giving you our top 10 best films of 2024. So our individual lists, this year you might go, that sounds a little bit smaller than what you guys usually do. We'll talk about that and why, but there will
Amelia Perez broke us.
There will be plenty of honorable mentions and things like that. But I think the year Eric and I had and the joke that we make that we were the bad boys of cinema this year, of not really enjoying a lot or thinking it's a weak year in general. We'll go over all of that, but I think that's why we're just going to pare it down to a top 10 each this year. And but we will do a top 25 of 20 or most anticipated 25 of 2025. So stay tuned for that. But Eric, how are you? How was your break? How was your Christmas? How was everything?
Well, mostly low key in the sense that I didn't do much or go anywhere, partly because when my nephew came over, he got everybody sick. Ivor is often sick. And so with that, he infected everybody to the point where I was bedridden for, I think, like 3 or 4 days, including Christmas. So, I was just, it's not that being sick is fun, but I think if you're going to get sick, the best time of year to do it is when everything is shutting down or there's nothing new to cover, because you're not exhausting yourself further to the point where you're going to make it worse. You actually have time to rest. And then, I think you go through those stages. It's like the stages of death where, ultimately you come to acceptance at the end. But, you start off where you're excited for the vacation or the time off because you've been working nonstop, especially in the month of December, where you're trying to get everything done before the holidays, with me with Rogers and things like that. And then, as well as you, where you're, coordinating with family stuff, but then also, time for just sort of reflection and to decompress. And then by the time you get to, New Year's, and then just even afterwards, you're starting to get that itch of like, oh, I need to do something, or what should I do? Or should I be using this time in some productive way? And then by the time you get to like the second or last day of the holidays, then you have that feeling of like, oh no, I'm not ready at all to go back. I feel rusty.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like, it's like when you're in school. Like I feel like when the holidays are around, like you're enjoying it at first, but then you get bored, and then ultimately, you feel like, did I use that time to really relax and enjoy? And it just went by so quickly. And like you were saying, like being 2025 now, 2024 just feels like it went by in a flash.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, each year goes by faster and faster, right? So I was texting Nevis this morning because she's in Costa Rica right now, and we realized it might have been like the longest trip she's taken without me in a long, like, since maybe we've been dating. It's been like over a week, probably 10 days or something like that. And
separation anxiety.
Yes, but yes and no. Like, it's nice that, she had a wonderful time with her friends, it seems like, and I had a great time. Both, I went to LA for WWE Raw on Netflix,
yeah, you did.
which I'll talk about on another show, and went to Disneyland, which I'll talk about on another show. But I also got sick, to your point. So like, I've been recovering, I recovered from that, went to LA, but then that destroyed me again. So I've been recovering the last couple days. But then going back to my point is like it both felt like a long time away from each other, but then also like she left yesterday. And I feel like that's just like life in general, where it's like, oh, that feels like both 10 years ago and yesterday. With anything in the last 10 years. 5 years, 3 years, 2 years. So, yeah, I kind of feel the same way, right? And when you look back and reflect on all the movies we've seen this year, and you go, oh my God, that came out this year, or stuff like that is always kind of an interesting thing to do. And then with the year we've had with movies, I still love the movies. There's still a lot of movies that are going to be on this list that I really am ride or die for. But as I was looking through, I'm like, even in this top 10, I get to number 7 and I start to go, I don't know. I'm like,
Well,
I like
the
the
bottom
movie.
half, I think, of any list is
Yeah.
like that, right? Where it's
But
almost
I
like
think there are other years I can make a top 25, and I think numbers 20 are still great, and 22 are still phenomenal. Where this year, like I love all the movies on I have a top 20 something list on Letterboxd. If people after this want to go check it out, or I'll put these on our Letterboxd page as we're starting fresh in the new year and going to keep everything updated. So, but I start to go even in a top 10, when we get to 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm like, I like these movies, but do they belong on a best of the year list? Did I just not see enough? I missed out on some things because I haven't seen them yet and
well, the
haven't had
quality
time.
rises especially too, right? Like
Yeah,
if there's something that you thought was like good or like you enjoyed it for what it was, but if you don't see anything else that's great, or if you're even comparing that middle of the road or okay movie to something that's doing having a similar structure or theme to another, then you elevate them at the end of the year
yeah,
because it feels like, oh well, they were actually better than what I initially thought because there wasn't anything else that was as good.
yeah, totally. So it'll be fun to talk about all this. And I can't wait looking to the next episode as well, which is going to be that most anticipated movies, because I think looking back and looking forward is some of the most fun I have doing this show. So do you want to get right into it? I haven't we haven't talked about any of this at
Yeah,
all
I
like
mean,
we
my
usually
number
do.
1 to 10 is just Trap.
Yes, just Trap over and over again,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
So that's one
um
of those movies where it's very much like I like it, it's
yeah,
fun, but, like, when I'm looking back now, it's even better in comparison to, single location films or movies that, are sequestered in one location. So something like Conclave. I would take
sure.
Trap over Conclave.
Yeah, yeah, that's us this year. That's us this year. So, and we
We
can
become
kind of go,
contrarians.
yeah, I do, which I don't love. I mean, but it just, I guess, naturally happens as you get older and you talk about movies. But I'm
But
joking. But
I do think they're like, to be fair, I don't think this year was a bad year. I think this year was mostly, I think, a disappointing year because there were a lot
sure,
of movies that, and we'll talk about this more on the top 25 when we review our list for 2024, where there was movies that we had high hopes for because of the
yeah,
director or the premise, and they let us down. That being said, I think like any year can be a bad year if you don't look outside your purview. If you do a
sure,
little bit of research, if you do a little bit of investigation, if you are curious about what is beyond, the 20 big blockbuster films and
yeah.
the high profile art movies, and you look for something outside of that box, then you can be excited about it. I think I
Where
don't.
admittedly, I'd say I'm someone who hasn't really done that this
But
year that
no,
much.
you have. I think you have, and you don't give yourself enough credit because you try. You always see, this is the thing I like. I mean, obviously, like I love you and you're my best friend, but like what I like about you in terms of being a film person and somebody, you always give everything a shot. Like,
Yeah,
I know you're a Marvel guy and you play up the brand and that's great, but you always meet a film, even if you ultimately don't like it, you still give it a shot. Where I do find
sure.
that some
For
film
the most
critics
part. There's
some film
more that I
critics
could
won't even
watch.
yeah, but some film critics won't even see it just because it's a Marvel movie,
That's true.
or some
Yeah,
film critics won't see it because it's not a Marvel movie. You
yeah.
try to meet everything halfway and watch the film before
I'm just
making a decision.
slow when it comes to some of this stuff. Like, I know there's a couple that are gonna be on your list that I do really want to see and give
Yeah.
a shot
But
to.
you
I
saw
just
Flow, and you loved Flow, and you saw
Flow
that
will
at
you'll hear
Toronto.
that, in my top 10, and, obviously, my number 1 is it's bigger than what I anticipated it to be because of the distributor that picked it up and the release strategy that they're giving it, and, it being on probably know what I'm talking about. We'll get there when we get there, but, yeah, I take pride in that too. Like, I just love movies, right? And then, yes, a lot of it is subjective, and that subjectiveness does come into your interest going into a movie, right? Or what, because I mean, I'm human like anyone. I know we say this is our job, but ultimately it is your job. It is my hobby. And I I have changed how I review movies and what movies I review, in the sense of, we made a joke about the going in, who cares? Like, and for me, I think that now it's like, I'm going to review stuff that interests me. I will give things a shot as long as it interests me, but I don't feel obligated to watch everything anymore. And but that interests me can be from a premise, you said, from a director, like from an actor, or it can be from a suggestion of someone who I trust their
A
opinion on
recommendation,
movies,
yeah.
right? So if you go in and go, Matt, I think you'd really like this, or I know it's high up on your list, we're not always going to agree. A lot, I'd say like 70 to 85% of the time we're on the same page. And then there's that kind of like 25 to 30% where we kind of differ just from personal tastes and things, right? But I know a couple movies that'll show up on your list, I think, that I do really want to see because you really enjoyed them. I just haven't had either the time or energy to, one, either go out and go see that movie, or sit down and make sure I give it my full attention watching a screener at home. So sometimes, with limited time or everything that's going on, or watching stuff with my wife or whatever, it's going, okay, what's an easy watch? And sometimes you fall into that of going like, oh, I don't have the mental capacity right now to watch that, but I can watch Creature Commandos or something, right?
Well, the thing is, it's
Like
like, you have to prioritize your time. Do you want to see, groundbreaking and form pushing art like Nickel Boys, or do you
yeah.
want to see Craven the Hunter?
Exactly. And which one have I seen, right? Like, and
I mean, you finally
I
saw Killers of the Flower Moon in the most
I did,
optimal way
yeah.
possible.
Yeah, in
So,
the most, actually, I didn't watch it on my phone. It was a plane seat. Is that better or worse? I don't know. Um, so I guess a phone might have been better because it's an Apple movie and I'd be watching it on an Apple product, and then maybe it's gonna look better on my phone. Like, this quality of my
and
phone
corporate
screen is
synergy.
probably yeah, the verticals and like, I think it probably would have looked better on my phone, but sometimes you're on that plane and you're like, I don't feel like taking anything out. I'm just going to watch something on the back of this plane seat. And uh, I will say, every movie I've watched in my top 10, I saw in a movie theater, I think, for the most part. Oh, well, no, a couple I watched screeners for, but but yeah, so it's let's get into it. I'm going to start with we're going to go back and forth, I think. So we'll go 10 to 1.
Oh god.
Um, why?
I
Why?
don't know if I've even formed my hold on, I gotta
Oh,
look
do
at
you
this.
just want to do alphabetical? We could do that
No, no, no,
too.
I
Like,
was thinking about doing 1 to 10.
oh, I
Um,
think you go reverse order.
no,
You want
I
to
know, I
save the
know, I
number
know.
one.
I just gotta look at, like, where my 10 is.
That's
Hold on.
fine.
Matt, you start.
So
Talk about
I'll
Kraven the Hunter.
start. I'll start with honorable mentions first, and
Okay.
then I'll toss it over to you for some honorable mentions. So I'll just kind of lump all of these together, and then we can kind of talk about both of our honorable mentions. So things that didn't quite make my top 10, but I want to give a shout out to. You've mentioned one of them already. I will give a shout out to Juror number 2. It was one of my biggest surprises of the year. Clint Eastwood can be very kind of hit or miss. But I think it's a very silly movie, but a thoroughly entertaining courtroom drama with very silly twists and turns. Everyone making the dumbest decisions possible, but it makes for a highly entertaining kind of thriller. I want to give a shout out to Juror Number 2. I want to give a shout out to a couple smaller films that I really like that came out this year with Sometimes I Think About Dying, Paying for It, and I Saw the TV Glow. I think, I Saw the TV Glow maybe being the biggest of those three, but I think all three are wonderful little movies that maybe for people who are listening to this, or maybe to your point, Eric, the people that mostly only watch those big movies that come out each year. Those are three I would highly suggest to people to see if it's on a streaming service or something like that, and throw all of those on. Did Paying for It actually get a theatrical release
It's
yet, or
getting a
no?
theatrical release at the end of January, so
So
January
technically, I
31st.
guess maybe it's a 2025 movie, but hey, I'll
And
I'll
that's a
throw it
movie
on.
you can recommend to, comic book, movie
Yeah,
fans because it is a
based on
graphic
a graphic
novel.
novel, a very Toronto movie,
Yeah.
and but I also think there's a great Daisy Ridley performance, and Sometimes I Think About Dying. I Saw the TV Glow, devastating but thoroughly entertaining as well. So those three and Juror Number 2. I will give very different, but yeah,
He's a
I
good
will.
man.
And a couple Netflix movies I want to give a shout out to with Carry On and Rebel Ridge. I think I love Jeremy Saulnier, and I think Rebel Ridge was a pitch perfect kind of slow burn thriller. I think Aaron Pierre and Don Johnson are phenomenal in that movie. I think it's one of those kind of good action movies that's also trying to say something, and I just think it's a wonderful movie that I wish I got to see in a theater. And speaking of the same thing, very different, more on the Juror Number 2, very stupid side of things, but Carry On I think is wonderful, from Vulgar Auteur Jean-Michel Colette Serra. I thought Carry On was in the vein of his other, transportation thrillers, or something like Die Hard or Phone Booth. I thought Jason Bateman was perfect as this nonchalant kind of villain. Taron Egerton's a lot of fun in it. I think, again, suspension of disbelief has to go kind of out the window, but I feel like, going back to our conversation we had during our last our What If review of Who Cares, this is one of those Who Cares movies. Like, I've talked to some other people that didn't quite love the movie, where they're like, oh, it's just so stupid, it was so dumb or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but that's kind of why I loved Carry On. And yeah, the Christmas element I think is very tacked on. It could be any holiday, but
It works
I
though. It works,
it
especially
does,
because you
yeah.
look at Die Hard. Like, Die Hard's a better movie than this. But the one thing in Die Hard that is a little bit
Christmas
suspension of
party
disbelief,
on Christmas Eve,
Christmas
yeah.
Eve, right? Where working on Christmas Eve at an airport or during the
Yeah,
Christmas Eve season makes sense. Like, people
totally.
still travel, like, even right
I'm
up
just saying it
before.
could be Thanksgiving, it could be
Yes.
any holiday, right? But I even from a person who just loves Christmas movies, starting with and ending with Christmas music and it just taking place over the holidays, I think makes for that perfect action thriller. Um, and yeah, it is one of the dumbest movies you'll probably watch this year, but I had an absolute blast with it.
And that one
Um,
sequence with Danielle Deadwyler in the car, scored to
some people
Last
hate that
Christmas.
scene.
That's
It's
great.
the
It's
best.
so
It's
much
the
fun.
best. Yeah,
I'm
does it
just
look terrible? Sure, but I
sure.
mean, it's
It's
um
it's vulgar.
yeah, exactly. And then
And
one final,
JCS
yeah,
escaping The Rock's clutches. I'm so
yeah,
excited because in 2025 he's got 2 movies, one of which is with Danielle Deadwyler in the lead, and then he has a reboot, legacy sequel to
a
Cliffhanger.
cliffhanger. I know, which I'm all for, man. He's the perfect person for that. Yeah. So, escaping the clutches of the Rock is a great way of putting it. Even though I liked his Jungle Cruise movie, but Black Adam is terrible, and I'm glad that he's getting away. And then one final one. It's a short film. You might wait till next Christmas if you haven't watched it, but An Almost Christmas Story, David Lowery's short. we haven't talked about anywhere, so I want to give it a little bit of a shout out here. I thought it was a wonderful throwback to the stop motion animation Christmas classics. I thought it was a wonderfully sweet, simple story that's just absolutely beautifully animated. Doesn't overstay its welcome. Has style. Alfonso Cuarón, I believe, produced it as well. Right? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. And then David Lowery directs it. So maybe now that we're in January, hold it till next Christmas, but
Or
just
July.
save this. Or just watch it in July. Yeah. So those are I think there's some other ones that are in my, 11 to 20 that I could, but they're big movies that people already know about. So those are the ones that I kind of wanted to shout out in my honorable mentions.
Yeah, I mean, I really love that you mentioned in terms of like Netflix this year. I was looking back at all the reviews I did, and I didn't really cover any Netflix films. And the two best ones were, I think, movies that they really didn't put any emphasis on awards consideration. And it's a shame. Like I'm not necessarily a Puritan in the sense of like I have to see everything theatrically, but I prefer the theatrical experience obviously to watching things at home, because you give yourself over to watching something in a theater in a dark room. Rebel Ridge and Carry On would have been amazing movies to watch with an audience, especially people that are locked into it. And it just feels like such a disappointment that those films, especially Rebel Ridge not playing TIFF, feels a little bit egregious.
The festival, right? Yeah. Not the Lightbox in general.
Well, even the Lightbox in general. Because I remember watching The Killer at the Lightbox after coming back from Aruba, and that was one of the best experiences I had the year before in 2023.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things where it's like, it's just a shame that, or like what they prioritize, because obviously, they're having success with the aforementioned Amelia Perez awards wise, but is that a film that people are actually watching on Netflix, or at least watching the whole thing on Netflix? Where I feel like Rebel Ridge and Carry On are films, even if you're only passively watching, they're going to tune into them. And they're very entertaining, and there's a durability to those movies where in years to come, I think they'll be kind of like go-to comfort films in a way, even though, Rebel Ridge is dealing with very serious themes, but there's still something about the neo-noir genre elements that are very enticing to a wide crowd.
Yeah, I think Carry On will be one that I revisit during the holiday season, like Die Hard, right? Like if you're in the mood for kind of Christmas adjacent movies, but you want something a little bit more thrilling. Like I genuinely think, does it enter that Christmas classic territory? Probably not, but I'd say give it consideration in the next couple of years. It's too early to say that. So, but yeah, what about your honorable mentions? Maybe 4 or 5 of them or something like that.
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll cheat a little bit here, and I'll do a special citation to Mubi. And the reason for that, obviously the substance, which I do find fascinating that it has become this awards movie because it's just on paper, on watching it, it's not that kind of film. And I still like the movie. I know you don't, but
I'm mixed negative, but yeah,
it's not my favorite of the movie releases. This is kind of why I'm like, but I have to give them so much credit this year, because it did feel like a breakout year for them with the substance doing as well as it has. But they had a lot of really good films, one of which is this Romanian film about the gig economy and how everything is terrible, and it's so funny and so sharp. Do not expect too much from The End of the World from Radu Judah. It's just phenomenal. I really enjoyed the Ross Brothers Gasoline Rainbow. Zia Anger's My First Film, which is just really lovely and thoughtful, and interrogates what it means to be a filmmaker and to have failure being sort of an inspiration to reinvent yourself or to keep going. So they've had a lot of really good stuff out this year. And so with that, like in terms of like a streamer or a smaller art house niche label, they've really come into their own. And they're even in Canada releasing, bigger films that, have American distribution elsewhere. Like you saw Maria and Queer get movie releases. So they're really coming into their own. There's a wonderful Canadian film called Seagrass, which I really enjoyed quite a bit. Aaron Schunbrun's A Different Man, which is just like, if you dismiss Sebastian Stan like I had, watching this movie, he is a revelation here. And so when you think about, actors that, find the right role or taking their, cachet that they've made through more popular films and doing something interesting with them. Sebastian Stan, even though I didn't love The Apprentice, and I know you liked it a little bit more than I did, but
Doesn't make my top, but yeah.
you got to appreciate like him looking for the weird sort of off-kilter films.
No, for sure.
In comparison to say like Chris Evans, who is doing stuff like Red One. And so, like you just really appreciate like A Different Man is a film that looks at apathy and the cruelty of the world and is very much like in line with Charlie Kaufman. Adam Pearson is amazing in the film as well, who's also
I really
a big
want to watch
WWE
it,
fan.
I know, yeah.
And so, like it's just one of those movies where it's like it burrows into your brain and you keep thinking about it. And then, Janet Planet's also really good. Another A24 movie, His Three Daughters, I really had a great emotional response to. A film that I saw very late that I'm kind of embarrassed that it took me this long to see it, is a film called Red Rooms, which is this courtroom
Red One,
procedural that is very much like, if you are a David Fincher fan,
oh yeah,
you need to see this movie. It is so disturbing. The lead performance is completely, they could have called this movie A Complete Unknown, because you can never predict what this character is going to do or what is going through her mind, and you are just on the edge of your seat watching it. So, there's a lot of really, really good stuff out there that comes to, like, again, like I know I think you're gonna talk about some stuff that's on your list that maybe I could mention here, but Juror Number 2 is another one that didn't quite make it, but I think it is more entertaining than half of the films I watched this year. And then a couple other quick mentions as well. Hard Truths with Marianne Jean-Baptiste, who's amazing in Mike Leigh's film, and you feel awful for her, even though she's a terrible person and just completely almost impossible to be around. And that performance almost projects on you. You have Transformers 1 and Better Man, which a 1-2 punch for Paramount, and
you'll be hearing more about those soon.
Yeah, and so I'll leave it at that. But you know what, again, there's been some really good stuff, and like even movies like Sometimes I Think About Dying, which didn't make the top 10 either, I've thought more about than a lot of the awards films that have come out this year. And so on that note, it just feels like, okay, as long as you are looking for movies,
like sorry to cut you off, Daisy Ridley not being in the conversation for anything kind of sucks too, but it was such a small movie, right?
Her career is mind-boggling to me, that like post Star Wars, it feels like she's struggled quite a bit to like find work and to be a star on her own right, and not just be tangentially kind of brought into a franchise. And it's just a shame, because she's so good in that movie. And obviously that film got its release at the beginning of January in 2024. So it kind of is easy to forget about as you're moving on throughout the year. But there's something about the atmosphere, about the look and the design of the film that, like it's such a strong directorial effort by Rachel Lambert that you're completely immersed by it, and then the performance just breaks your heart. So there's so much going on there that I love about that movie. And I do hope that like when people whether she does another Star Wars film or finds another kind of blockbuster franchise or something, like they'll go back in terms of like a retrospect and look at that film.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah,
nice picks. A lot that I want to see too. I just again, only so much time, but I do have a long backlog already. All right, I'll kick it off with number 10, and we'll go back and forth. Speaking of Paramount, you mentioned a couple Paramount movies. A movie that I think kind of came and went this year, and I was one of its, I think, biggest fans. I'm going to start my top 10 with A Quiet Place Day One. Um, Again, you think a prequel to, the Quiet Place franchise, but bringing in a director like Michael Sarnowski, right?
Yeah.
Sarnowski, director of Pig and things like that, having a great cast with Lupita Nyong'o, Joseph Quinn. It just really kind of caught me off guard with how much it affected me emotionally and this relationship between these two people. Great cat performance as well. I think just if you're going to do a prequel that maybe doesn't add too much, not that you needed much lore to why these aliens came to Earth and what they're doing and shit like that, but I think just a really good um, story about these two people and this love for each other that's platonic, that just I think you don't it never had to be romantic. I think just it completely destroyed me by the end of it, and I think I was one of its biggest fans this year. I think it's exciting, it's thrilling, the effects are great. I think it's excellently directed. Probably one of my favorite blockbusters of the year if I'm looking at the rest of my list, when you're talking about a big kind of action spectacle horror kind of thing. Like if you're not counting, we'll get to the other ones on my list, but yeah, I was one of the biggest fans of A Quiet Place Day One. It's I think it's a wonderful wonderful movie.
It is one of the best. Well, it is the best directed film in that
Yeah,
franchise. And Michael
totally.
Aronofsky, like, it's, Pig. I think for both of us, an amazing Nick Cage performance and a lot of incredible world building that was original, but obviously was compared partly to like John Wick or something like that. But what he's able to do with the sensibilities that he brought in such a small, intimate film that hits you emotionally and vulnerably, he brings here. And Lupita Nyong'o, I think, you're talking
Yeah,
about performances that should be in the conversation. It is a blockbuster movie. It's a commercial film, but that performance also is worthy of
yeah,
awards consideration. And her career is interesting because obviously she wins the Oscar for her first feature with 12 Years a Slave. But in terms of the work she's doing in genre films, like I look at this and I look at Us and I'm like, man, she is just continually reminding people that genre is not to be dismissed when it comes to acting, when it comes to the emotion of performance. And it's such a shame that a lot of people do dismiss horror and science fiction as anything more than just entertainment.
yeah,
It didn't make even my top 25, but it is still a very well made, solid film with good performances and a movie that is better than it deserves to be or has any right to be, considering this
totally.
is a prequel to something that
Yeah,
is very high concept. And to care about characters that you maybe kind of know where the trajectory is going a little
a
bit.
very simple and predictable movie, right?
Yeah.
But they do it's so, I think, well done, that those character moments, and you said like that performance from Lupita Nyong'o, especially, like I feel like it carries the movie, and again, it doesn't do anything necessarily groundbreaking from its plot, from its lore, from any of that stuff, but I think it just executes all of that so well and so effectively, and then that core performance, I think, is the that emotional core to the movie. And I think it, yeah, I remember just like bawling my eyes out with Nevis watching it. And I'm like, I wasn't expecting that. And I think that's, you got to trust kind of a gut reaction to a movie. And that was one of the most kind of guttural reactions that I wasn't expecting. And it goes back to our conversation of like, expectations can play a huge part into your reception of a movie, right? And I think my expectations for that movie, while I was intrigued because of the director and things like that, and I'm a huge fan of that franchise. Like I really do like A Quiet Place part one and part two, but they never really affected me emotionally. They were just very entertaining movies, I thought. And this affected me emotionally. And when a movie can do that, and I'm an easy cry and stuff like that too, I'm not gonna lie, but um it just kind of really landed with me. So I know it's a movie that I think will be kind of forgotten last year. And I'm not saying it's a big Hollywood movie. It's not like this small little movie that needs to be kind of brought up. But I feel like out of this year that I think was a relatively weak year for big studio movies, I think Quiet Place Day One is so good, and it kind of just it came and went, right? I think people enjoyed it, but I feel like it came out, people enjoyed it, and then I feel like a lot of people forget it even came out last year. So
Mm.
I could have put something else on my top 10 that, but I wanted to make sure made that number 10 spot because I really kind of feel like it came and went. I want to champion that movie.
Yeah, and it's not simply disposable, entertainment, and I think that's what like a good number 10 movie is. It's almost a statement in terms of like something that, you know, worked personally for you, or something that is a little bit like outside of the box of what a movie can be on a top 10 list, because I do find that sometimes, once you get to like your top 5 or top 6, even there, especially when you're doing a show or talking to another critic, there is some overlap,
Yeah.
obviously, not always, but there is sometimes. And usually once you get to like your top 2, there's not a lot of inspiration in terms of having a conversation, because the movies that you've picked have been, dissected and talked about so much that it's like, okay, well, you knew this was coming, or you knew
Yeah.
that, like, if you watched the show or listened to the show, you knew we've been talking about this movie or that movie in this way for months now. Where like talking about like a Quiet Place Part 2 or a Quiet Place Day 1, pardon me, it's like, oh, okay, like that was something that I know you guys liked or were surprised by, but man, it must have had like this lasting impact on you,
Yeah.
because like you were saying, like part of it is like it is better than, you know 90% of the other blockbusters that were released this year, but also it just feels like, there's an authorial voice behind it.
Yeah.
There's an authorship of this up and coming director who, like there's almost a feeling as though a cautionary tale could have happened here, where like the director who makes this little indie gets swallowed up by the big sort of studio system to make a film that he's basically being controlled himself. Like we've seen that with Marvel movies, but not just Marvel movies, but other studio films like the Jurassic Park franchise, where you'll get an indie filmmaker that's brought into the big leagues, but they're really not there other than just maybe to have like a name brand recognition, be like, oh, we got the
Yeah.
director of this to do this, but really it's still being controlled by the producers. Here it feels like a little bit of that emotion of Pig came through in A Quiet Place Day One, where that could have been lost. So it makes me very excited to see what Sarnofsky is going to do
Yeah.
next. And I believe he is producing a later stage version of Robin Hood with Hugh
Oh, cool.
Jackman and Jodie Comer. So with A24. So that'll be interesting as well to
Cool.
see. My number 10 isn't as much of a statement per se, because it's popped up on a lot of best of lists, but it's one of two David Lynchian films that are and Lynchian is a word that I think is just used very commonly now in the vernacular of film critics when you're describing anything that is weird or strange or just a little bit different from the norm. But I think with the two movies that I'm going to talk about, David Lynch is such an influence and inspiration on these films. So the first of my Lynchian-esque films is Bertrand Bonello's The Beast, with Leah Seydoux and George Mackay. And what it basically is a kind of reincarnation film where Leah Seydoux plays the same character but in 3 different time periods. So the first is this French costume drama that ends with a flood and also partly takes place in a doll shop. The second story is sometime in the 2010s to 2020s and is about this young French exchange student who's living in LA and is being stalked by basically like an incel type. George Mackay plays the love interest in the first story. He's the incel in the second one. And then the third one is this like weird futuristic world where people's emotions are being basically lobotomized, and she falls in love with George Mackay's character again, and they're kind of deciding whether or not they need to explore the relationship. And it's always like, it's a movie basically where characters are too late to get to the place that they want to, too little too late, and feeling that regret throughout. And each story has its own feelings and thoughts about how we miss opportunities in life and how we miss, that moment that we feel like, talking about what if. And then in the final act, it all comes together in this devastating shot that very much is out of Twin Peaks. Leia Seydoux is amazing in this film, and like you watch this movie, you are thrilled, you are disturbed, but at the same time, you are just so appreciative that science fiction can be both cerebral and thinking about like how to create something that is a little bit more you know abstract, but can still be relatable within the confines of making an art house film. And I think this is a movie that if you were talking before, like if you recommend this film to sci-fi fans or to genre fans, I think this is a good kind of balance of eating your vegetables, but also still finding something that is very entertaining and engaging and thought-provoking. And Seydoux is so good in this movie. It's just one of those films that like once you watch it, you think about it and it just sits with you and you can't stop thinking about it, and it just sits there. And so I haven't been able to stop thinking about certain scenes within the film throughout the year. There's a great Roy Orbison needle drop, again talking about the Lynch thing.
Yeah.
So much worth checking out here. And yeah, Seydoux's just one of those really great actors who like continually chooses, can be in Dune Part 2, but then can also be in this or One Fine Morning, and is just doing some really great work that maybe is taken for granted, and like we won't recognize what she's doing until much later on in her career, because it is
Yeah.
phenomenal that she can work with all these directors and still be champion as I think one of the great international actors working today.
Absolutely. Got to put it on my list now. Great choice. My number 9, the only documentary that is going to make my top 10, but I'm glad one of them got in there, is going to be Will and Harper. Another one that I think I got to trust my gut reaction to, a movie that I also thought was so wonderfully entertaining and important at the same time. Will Ferrell, one of my favorite kind of personalities working in Hollywood and in the studio system, and one of the best comedians I think of our generation, coming out and championing his friend, and being an ally for the trans community, and at such a high profile is something you don't kind of see a lot in Hollywood. And then Harper Steele being so vulnerable of making this film that both focuses on her, but then also just this buddy comedy road trip kind of movie. So I think it kind of plays in both realms of being like an important kind of message movie about, the trans experience in the United States, and going back to places that you don't know if it's safe to go to anymore, now that you've transitioned. And I think it's hilarious. It's wonderfully shot. It's just like a fun movie that will also make you cry. I think it's a very simple movie. I think Kristen Wiig does a wonderful end credits song that I think should be in consideration
Co-written by
for
Sean Douglas, Michael
yeah,
Keaton's
yeah.
son.
Oh, there you go. And if you're a fan of SNL or if you're a fan of Will Ferrell, I think it's an absolute must watch. Another Netflix movie on my list here. Well, probably the only one that breaks that top 10 from Netflix, but I think it's absolutely wonderful. And if you haven't watched it, it's such an easy watch. Throw it on. It's on Netflix. I think it's great. So I'll keep it at that.
Yeah, I came late to it. I apologize for the dogs barking, by the way, if
It
you hear
is what
that
it
in the
is, man.
background.
Yeah.
I watched it later for awards consideration, and while I didn't necessarily love the film, I just loved those two together,
Yeah.
and that friendship felt so genuine. And sometimes, even if you are friends for so long, it doesn't necessarily translate on screen or even in, podcast or documentary form or whatever you want to call it. When it comes to any kind of relationship, friendship, like sometimes it's just like it's organic to real life without a camera or recording being
Yeah.
put in front of it. And so that really much comes through in sort of the relationship that those characters have. And I do like the SNL connections in terms of like almost being a road trip through the history of SNL in a way, but just two people having a conversation and really feeling like they're getting back in touch. And it's hard, I think, staying in touch with people that you even care about, because life
Yeah.
changes so much, right? Like you do feel as though, when you get older, you're not always seeing the person because, you have your own life. You get married or you don't, or you have a
You
job that
move
requires
away or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so all these things, all these factors apply. And so in order to stay in somebody's life, sometimes you have to like find an excuse to do something like this. And I really appreciated that as well, where it's like it's finding a way to keep not only in touch but just to keep going, like to keep active in each other's lives. So like that I really appreciate as well. And yeah, it's interesting that that's a film that played at Sundance and then was picked up by Netflix, and then also you saw it at TIFF originally, so
Yeah.
and it came out in September, but kind of disappeared. But the
Yeah.
people that have seen it, or actively seeked it out, do love it. So, to the point of where it will go in terms of awards, it'll be interesting as well, because it does feel very populist. And I can see
Yeah.
like the Academy being like, oh, well, it's
Totally.
too popular, we can't vote for it.
Yeah, I could see that as well. And I think, it is a simple documentary when it comes to, its structure and things like that. But I do think that it is both fun and important. So yeah, and to your point, everyone who's watched it that I know of has really enjoyed it. So if you haven't and you like those personalities, watch it. And I think, or show someone that maybe isn't familiar with the trans experience, and I think that's using Will Ferrell using his platform, to kind of showcase that. I think is great. So that's my number 9. Now back over to you, Eric.
Yeah, I'll just also quickly say that Will Ferrell has
Yeah,
been a part of our lives for
I know.
so
Yeah,
long that it just feels interesting watching him learn about things that he himself doesn't know or understand, in a way that he can, use that voice in a positive way, in a platform, in order to normalize something that I think so many people, not necessarily are transphobic per se, but maybe are fearful or don't understand, and
yeah,
need someone like Will Ferrell, who's kind of almost like a bridge to saying like, well, if I can learn, so
yeah.
can you.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
you know
exactly,
so yeah,
exactly.
it's heartwarming in that way. And yeah, it's just nice that like, Will Ferrell is a guy where he can kind of like surprise you that way, and he's just a likable dude too. So
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, my number 9, I feel like I'm going in Janice territory with The Beast, and now this one, being the pretentious art house critic that I am, uh
Hey, that's why our list will be balanced,
I
like
know.
everything should be.
uh All We Imagine as Light is a film that I also saw at
I really want to
TIFF.
see it. Yeah.
It is really, really good. Palia Kapadia directed this film. It's about 3 women in Mumbai. Her first film was a documentary. This it is basically looking at the similarities and differences, and you have the central character who's a nurse, and what happens is that she kind of feels like she has a one-sided relationship with her husband who's in Germany and sends her this rice pot. She's kind of connecting or mentoring this young woman that's living with her in her apartment that is falling in love with a Muslim boy, and sort of their kind of relationship is budding, and she's not sure if this young woman should go down this path in terms of being an arranged marriage, or what it means to fall in love with somebody that you choose. And then her other friend, who's being evicted from her home, has also lost her husband and is trying to find the paperwork of the documentation of ownership. And it's just these 3 characters struggling and surviving, but finding solidarity in each other. And it is one of the most hopeful and inspirational films without being maudlin that I saw last year. And it's good for the soul. It's good for humanity that we get a movie like this that feels, very much humanistic, and also, like you feel like you can empathize with the characters and the people in this situation. And it feels alive. Like while you're watching it, you feel the heat, you feel the water. It's just something that is visceral on the screen, but also balmy, and just in terms of a hangout film. Like it just feels like a great hangout movie, and where it leaves you is perfect. And it also has, I think, one of the best directed sequences of the year in terms of how we let things go or say goodbye to something. And for that, I think it is beautifully made. It's really strange that India did not put this as their international selection for the Academy Awards, because it is just, it would easily be in the top 5 in that category. And, just again, it's a different movie, but thinking about Amelia Perez probably winning in that category against something like All We Imagine Is Light is just mind-boggling to me. But that's the way the world is, and this movie doesn't feel like it's beating its chest and telling you how great it is either. It's just saying like, hey, if you want to come out and hang out with these characters and live in their world for a little bit, you're welcome to. And that for me is always enticing over something that is like plot driven. Yeah, and so I loved all 3 of the characters. I love the story. I love the idea of what it's talking about painful goodbyes, but finding truth within those goodbyes, and finding that you can do that and still have a life afterwards, and not feeling like it is the end of your world as well, that you don't have codependency. So there's just so much in there that I really, really loved. And if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know if it's available to stream. I think it's still playing smaller art house theaters, but it does feel like it has broken out a little bit in terms of having a profile that people are aware of.
Yeah, it's been, you keep telling me to watch it, and it's been on the top of my list with a couple other ones that I think are going to show up on your list for a while. So I've been hovering over that screener, like, but again, one of those movies that I have to be in the right mood for, but I can't wait to see it. So good choice. My number 8 is going to be another one that surprised me. One of 2 animated films that is going to be on my top 10 is Transformers 1. Probably the first time ever a Transformers film has made my top 10 of the year. Again, another one that might, expectations and low expectations might have come into play with how much I enjoyed this one, but I think is a genuinely great kids movie, a genuinely great animated movie, but not even just for kids. Like there are some
Kids at
dark
heart.
themes, and yeah, like again, bringing out your inner child and playing with nostalgia, but then also telling a fresh kind of story that you exactly know where it's going to go, but the way that they do it, it's one of there's two things I say. That gut reaction is what I go by a lot with how much I love movies, and that can be both from an emotional standpoint when it comes to crying or making me feel something or care about the characters, or it can be like a fist pumping fuck yeah kind of thing, and that doesn't happen a lot in movies. But Eric knows this. When we're beside each other and we're pretty um you know stoic guys when it comes to watching movies, we're not like the loudest people in the room laughing or cheering or whatever. um, but there is an odd time, and there's two movies on this list in my top 10 where at the end of it, both Eric and I are like punching each other in the leg, going, fuck yeah. And Transformers 1 was one that did that. And I was completely not expecting it. I think the animation style actually really caught me off guard because it did the opposite of like Disney Wish, where Disney Wish, all the preview stuff, I remember going like, oh, I really kind of like this art style. And then when I'm watching it, I go, ooh, I don't think the art style works. And then in Transformers 1, I see the trailer and I go, ooh, I don't know about this art style. And then I watch it in context in the movie and I'm like, oh, it's actually really gorgeously animated. The action scenes are really thrilling. The lighting effects and like everything kicks ass in this movie. And the way that they play with, you said, your inner child or nostalgia and things like that, where they take those designs from the 80s, but they modernize them, or they kind of play with your expectations of characters and giving you their origins. And I think the voice cast, you can listen to our review. I thought everyone was pretty good. Scarlett Johansson was maybe the one that I thought was a little bit miscast, but
More algorithmic, right? Like in a way
yeah,
where it's like, oh, we need to get like movie stars who have
yeah.
distinct voices, but it does
Love
feel,
her, but I
yeah.
just felt like she was the one that kind of maybe didn't completely work. But just a thoroughly entertaining movie, probably the best Transformers film, fighting with that OG animated one from the 80s. And I think it's just a spectacular kind of enjoyable movie. And if you wrote it off because of the trailers or that you think it's a kids movie,
Or you
if
were
you
burnt
even
out
have,
by the Michael Bay films. I think a lot of
yeah,
people might have been like turned off just because of the excess of those
even if you
movies.
have a fraction, if you've enjoyed Transformers sometime in your life, or even if you enjoyed those Michael Bay movies when you were a teenager, when they were first coming out, but yes, you're burnt out on them. I know after the Beast Wars movie or whatever the fuck came out
Oh,
last
God.
year, I was burnt out too. Bumblebee was solid, but like, no one really wanted this. And I think that's why it maybe underperformed, especially being an animated film. But like, if you have Paramount Plus, or can somehow, go to a friend's house that has Paramount Plus.
Or just buy it on 4K for God's
Yeah, I
sakes.
know, but no one's gonna do that, Eric.
I know,
Like,
except me.
you, watch this because or if you have kids, it'll scar them in moments. But that's what a Transformers animated film should do: is slightly scar your child.
Well,
Just like
I'm glad
we
you mentioned
had.
that word
Yeah,
because it is the better Friends to Foes prequel than
then
Mufasa, the
Mufasa.
Lion
Yeah,
King. And another thing that I think is important, I know you mentioned the voiceover performances. Brian Tyree Henry, King of
great.
Monologues,
Yeah,
amazing as Megatron, but then also just as good and incredible in the Spider-Verse movies.
yeah,
He has great taste, but is also just an amazing actor. And like you think like someone of his stature could phone it in, or and nothing against that because sometimes these things are just paychecks, but doesn't. Like these feel like he like especially in this, it feels like he's giving a Shakespearean
yeah.
performance. It
He's
is so
excellent.
good.
Yeah,
So
totally agree.
good.
So that's my number 8, Transformers 1. Back to you.
God, I love that movie. It's so good. Yeah, and to your point, like I think the other fist pumping movie we will both be talking about
Yeah, in our top
coming
5s
up.
probably, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at my list now. 10, 9, 8. Okay. So the other Lynchian film that is in my top 10 is Jane Shunbrun's I Saw the TV Glow. Just a perfect piece of pop culture nostalgia exploration and complication and interrogation within the 90s milieu of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, styled filmmaking, but also being a trans story
Yeah,
told by a trans filmmaker.
absolutely.
Unlike Amelia Perez, which is directed by a cis white male. Um, take that as you will. Analog, stylistically, profound and moving. Justice Smith, an actor who I'd kind of written off in a lot of
I
other
agree.
things,
Yeah,
is incredible in this movie. Like, you feel the suffocation of, though, like, this person that doesn't know what to do with themselves because they feel as though they're being oppressed by suburban society, but also as though they can't be themselves, and feeling as though they have to apologize for their own existence. And the idea of taking a TV show that maybe had a greater impact on you as a child, and then as you grow up and you revisit something, that thing that you thought was important or valuable, or just had a visceral feeling to it all, isn't as good as you remembered it as a child. Your imagination is more heightened. The anxiety you have in the world is stronger, I think, when you're a kid. And also, when your parents are also dismissive of you, I think that plays a role in that narrative. So, it's Fred Durst's best performance as an actor, with one line of dialogue, but that one line of dialogue really impacts uh,
yeah.
the character's entire perception of the world and fear of being oneself. Uh, just a really incredibly moving but stressful film in a lot of
Yeah.
ways as well. And it just
That
reminded
last sequence, hard to breathe, dude.
it is. It totally is. And I really loved Jane Shunbrin's last film, their last movie. We're all going to the World's Fair, but this feels like a step up in a way where it's, given the time and the resources, you can make something that is so personal, but still very much speaks to a wide audience, bringing them in, whether it be from nostalgia of CW shows in the 90s, or David Lynch and Twin Peaks and things like that. And a big shout out as well here to Emma Stone, who's a producer on this.
Got to be one of the best working producers in
Like,
Hollywood right now.
sneakily so, like,
Yeah.
stealth producer, winning the Oscar last year for Poor Things, but then also producing films from people that are outside of the mainstream, that are niche. Obviously, she also produced Jesse Eisenberg's a Real Pain, but she's really finding stuff that is not conventional by any means. And obviously, working with Yorgos Lanthimos is incredible as well. But there is this feeling of, like, man, she's actively pursuing weird outsider art, and we're all better for it because of that. So
Yeah, I'd say Emma Stone. It's weird where how much has come from Superbad for me because I love Seth Rogen, another person who I think is one of the best working producers in Hollywood, and I think finds interesting stuff that both different than what Emma Stone's doing, obviously, but like in the populist realm of stuff, I think has found with Evan Goldberg, right? Seth
yeah,
Rogen, Evan Goldberg, yeah, have found really interesting things to do, and yeah, Emma Stone, and I didn't quite give a shout out to Kinds of Kindness, but a movie that I did really actually enjoy, for the
yeah, a more
most part.
consistent
Yeah,
anthology film, the
yeah,
exception of the rule. But yeah, she's a freak, and I love it. Like, I love
yeah,
that she has, like, this eclectic taste as a producer, but also as a performer. And so,
yeah,
like, just keep doing that, Emma. Just keep producing
yeah.
stuff that, like, find people that need their movies and their stories to be told. Because, like, between A Real Pain and I Saw the TV Glow, and what Fruit Tree is doing in her production company, like, it is just I'm so happy that's happening.
Yeah. And I echo everything you said about it. Didn't quite make my top 10, but there's no reason for that otherwise than I really, really enjoyed the movie. It just, some of this other stuff landed with me a little bit more.
Yeah, Craven just bumped it out a little bit.
Yeah, it was, no, but I agree with everything that you're saying. I thought it was an excellent movie, and I think it really nailed that kind of, like you said, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Are You Afraid of the Dark, all the like stuff from the 90s. So that really landed as
and
well.
Incorporating it as a movie about identity, you know, like all of that is really well done.
I absolutely agree. My number 7, I believe, is the only, if you don't count, I don't count A Quiet Place as a horror movie. So I'd say this is probably the only horror movie on my top 10. Another movie that I think, obviously, with its marketing and its release, it had its moment for sure. A little bit divisive. I think I'm on the very high end of what people thought about the movie, but is Oz Perkins' Long Legs. I got to give my dude Nick Cage in my top 10 at some point.
That's Highways.
I fucking love Long Legs. Like, I think it is a perfect FBI, horror thriller in the vein of Silence of the Lambs and things like that. But I also love Oz Perkins' attention to detail and style. Like, if you know my tastes in movies, you know things that are extremely my shit. And I love chapter-based storytelling. I love using different film techniques as a storytelling device or a thematic kind of, when it's telling flashbacks, those are shot on film or shot in a different aspect ratio. And like, when you look at a movie and as like this puzzle that you can kind of put together and use all these different kind of stylistic flourishes, I think Oz Perkins is really good at that. And I think he does that excellently in Long Legs. I think Micah Monroe is absolutely phenomenal in the lead. I think Nick Cage is both, we said this in a review, I think he's both wonderful and distracting a little bit. I think I might have preferred and even loved the movie a little bit more if they either never showed his face or had someone else in that role. We mentioned like having someone like Hugh Grant in Heretic this year, right? And having someone, yes, he's done a horror movie before or whatever, but like that nice guy persona going into this creepy kind of role, I think could have been really fun, where Nick Cage is a, not an obvious choice, but because I think he's almost bigger than himself now, where he's become kind of a living meme, that it kind of undercuts some of the creepiness in the movie. But I think from a style standpoint, I thought it was thoroughly disturbing. Yes, maybe it's not the scariest movie ever made. I think that's always hard when a movie uses that in its marketing, and other people
the marketing
say that,
in general, right? Like,
yeah,
I think
the marketing was phenomenal,
but it also set it up to fail a little bit, because
the marketing was so good that it almost,
the expectations,
are so high. And then I was on the very high end of absolutely loving the movie, that I could see some people going in and going, oh, okay, it's a fine or whatever like that. But I think the supernatural element I wasn't expecting, and I thought it was weirder than I even thought the movie was going to get. And I just think it's a really thoroughly entertaining movie that's very fucked up. Like, I think the entertainment value is off the charts. And I think I even described it as fun. Like, it was one of those movies that made me like giddy watching it, even though it's really, really fucked up what you're watching. So it's that weird kind of, it's both fun but really messed up. And I think
that's what it should be on the poster: fun but messed up.
Yeah.
Rohrbeck.
And I think it's just the style of the movie I just really, really vibe with, and the look, and I think that kind of all comes together to a thoroughly, thoroughly entertaining movie that I think, if you haven't seen yet, I love watching horror movies in October. This is a movie you could watch anytime, really. And
like
it is one of
July.
those, it's not necessarily like on that, I hate using the term, but elevated horror, but it is that one where like even my wife Nevis, who doesn't like gory, scary movies, there's those odd times that I'm like, I think you really vibe with this because of the style and how the story's told, and the FBI kind of lens on it, I think really works. And this is one that I do want her to watch. I just got to be like, well, close your eyes at this part, or close your eyes at this part. And it's not like like a Saw movie where it's extremely gory throughout the entire thing. There are moments of violence that are really disturbing and gory, but I think it is something where even if you don't do well with violence and gore, it could carry you because it's still, you know, a
Atmospheric.
procedural. Yeah, atmospheric and procedural, right? So I think if you don't do well with a slasher movie or just a gore-filled fest, there are gory moments, but I think there's just blocks of gore that you could be like, all right, maybe like
Lots of gore.
maybe close your eyes for the next 5 minutes or something, or for the next 2 minutes or whatever. I love Long Legs. I think it's fantastic. I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah, it didn't make my top list, but I do really like that movie quite a bit, and especially the production design as well.
Yeah.
You know, like the other word I describe it is, between that and Mandy, you have these two Nicolas Cage movies that are very phantasmagoric in terms of style
Yeah.
and look. Um, I know, talking to my brother, Kyle, he wasn't a big fan of some of like the insert shots and the coverage of it. I don't mind that because it does feel like, it's both, as you mentioned, an FBI procedural, but it feels like the serial killer manifesto aspect of it is encroaching and corroding
Yeah.
the Micah Monroe narrative. And she's also very funny in this movie. I feel like the
Yeah.
character is neurodivergent because she's so good at her job and focused and persistent on the tasks at hand, and can see things other people can't. But in terms of her social cues and what she's able to do as somebody, as existing in the world and interacting with people, it's very awkward, but not at the expense of making fun of somebody that maybe is on the spectrum or is neurodivergent, but still feels very relatable in that way. The other thing I really like about it, and Osgood Perkins has talked about this, and it's in the movie, and you have two, going back to David Lynch, you have two David Lynch alumni here with Nicolas Cage and Alicia Witt as Micah Monroe's mom in the film, is that it's a movie about parents feeling as though they have failed their children, or that they're going to fail their children, and the inevitability of feeling like, well, what do you do in a situation like that? How do you protect the things that you hold precious, that are going to be either destroyed or tainted by the real world? And is it a losing battle that you continue to fight, or is it something that you just give up on? And that feels like a really personal thing coming from Osgood Perkins, because that is something that, you know,
Yeah.
um, his mother tried to protect him from when Anthony Perkins was really sick and dying of AIDS. And then also, he's gone through incredible loss as a human being when you learn about his story with his mother as well, dying in one of the two planes that crashed into the World Trade Center towers. And so, like, to see like him explore grief and disappointment and tragedy, and how it progresses over the years, because this is a movie that isn't just like, simply in the 90s. This is something that expands from the 70s into the 90s, and how, this mythology and world building, takes time. It just doesn't happen overnight. And to go to Nicolas Cage for a second, I do agree with you, like the memification, the larger than life personality, it's all there. But he's doing some, I think, of the best work of
I
his
agree.
career with
Yeah.
Mandy, Dream Scenario, Pig, now this. And this is a character as well that on first reaction, yeah, it's big, like it's all prosthetics and makeup, but there's something. He's a horrible person for what he's doing. He's a murderer. Like there's no way to dismiss that. But there is that feeling of, again, empathy that comes through, of this is a character that maybe in his own life was rejected by his family and has been living on the outskirts of society and feels, marginalized in a way. And, you know, he's a product of the environment that maybe rejected him. And so you kind of do feel bad for him. And even with, the androgynous, rock stars that he
Yeah.
idolizes, whether it be Lou Reed or David Bowie, like it's all there, or T-Rex, like the use of T-Rex in this film is phenomenal. So there's a lot to like about this movie. I just think, like, the marketing, while like Neon did its job last year, like
Oh, that marketing is some
they
of the
went
best.
to it may be too good. Like, that's the only
Yeah.
problem where it's like, when it's saying it's the scariest movie of the year, I think that that's the biggest problem. But if you want to do like a double bill of Long Legs and The Exorcist 3, like, that is perfect. Like, it's one of those films, like, if you move the marketing aside, move the hyperbolic response of it aside, it's just a really solid horror movie with a lot on its mind. And I think it really is. If it wasn't for I Saw the TV Glow, which isn't necessarily like a horror movie in a traditional sense, I would say it is the best one, but it is definitely worth your time and not to be overlooked. Even if you are, like you said, like about Nevis, like, if you're not an all and out horror person, I think the procedural elements will intrigue you. I think Micah Monroe brings you into the narrative. I think the aesthetic and the design of it all is fascinating. Like, it has Night of the Hunter, but also German expressionistic filmmaking. And I do also completely agree with you with the Nick Cage thing. Like, I almost wish he was obstructed more in the way that,
or the prosthetics toned down a little bit, maybe, or something.
Yeah. Like, but I liked the idea that it was hiding him at first, in the same way that we talked about Bill Skarsgård in Nosferatu, where Count Orlok initially, when Nicholas Hoult, juror number 2, enters the castle, and you don't see him for a little bit. Like, I like the idea.
You see him, and he looks like Dr. Gero from Dragon Ball Z.
Exactly, and you're kind of the mythology is broken. You're waiting for Android 17 and 18 to show up, But yeah, there is something to say about, like, going back to even Sunshine. I think Danny Boyle did it perfectly with Mark Strong in that film. So really good pick, Matt. I really appreciate that. Like, you're repping horror here.
You're number 7, right? We're an hour and 15 in. This might be a long one, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is our top 10.
I love it.
I'll try to cut down the commentary.
No, dude, people listen to podcasts for commentary. I'm just laughing at us.
So this is my prequel in my my best of list this year, because you have 2 prequels and 2 Paramount prequels.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, the Paramount prequels were on fire.
We're hot in 2024. So my prequel is a movie that we have a very contentious relationship with the film that we've discussed before. It's my favorite movie of the 2010s. It is one of your least favorite films, and you have watched this movie, I think, like 7 times.
Mad Max.
Yes. So Furiosa.
Yeah. Wow, it did make your top 10. I'm surprised. Okay.
Cool. I loved it. If you're comparing it to Fury Road, yeah, it's not as good. What is? And the movie makes the decision to recap.
I'd argue many
Fury.
Things,
I know. But if I'm looking at it from me, if you're comparing it to Fury Road, there's no competition, there's no contest. But as its own weird kind of ode to silent era cinema and slapstick comedy, I think Chris Hemsworth, you were talking about him with Transformers 1, here he is just letting it go and letting it fly and having a ball as the villain. But it's also a movie about how narratives are taken over. You could look at this almost as like a story or a retelling of the Bible, where, like, something is taken when it's initially written and it's re-edited, or there are iterations. Heretic is another movie that looked at that as well, and diluted and changed and manipulated, and how legends are perceived over time and by different cultures and by different people. And I love that about this movie, that it's not necessarily trying to compete against Fury Road. Furiosa still feels very much like its own beast, but it still very much is exciting to see a filmmaker in the twilight of his career with George Miller completely go balls to the wall and not be afraid to try new things and experiment with how an action sequence plays out, or how performances within an action sequence plays out. There's a couple moments in this movie that are top tier, some of the best homages to the Wages of Fear / Sorcerer. Tom Burke is one of those actors that I continually love to see in supporting roles. Anya Taylor-Joy, I think, gives the best performance of her career outside of Robert Eggers' films here, and it's just like the perfect kind of conduit to the world. And it's a movie as well that's just not sentimental or sparing when it comes to how violent it can be and what it does to characters. George Miller has been rebooting and remaking this franchise since the 1970s. And it's something that I always love about a filmmaker, that they become obsessed with preoccupations that they have that they continue to find a way to explore. It's a shame that this probably will be the last one because of how this movie did commercially speaking.
Yeah.
But I would be down for another like 12 of these films. But it's just always exciting when like a director you kind of know so well continues to push themselves and continues to say, hey, I'm willing to do the work and willing to, explore, my own legacy, but the legacy that I've created and brought into the world in a way that maybe will upset people who are diehard fans of this other version of it, but I'm not saccharine to it, or I'm not, like beholden
Yeah.
to that narrative. So I love something like that. And it's just a shame that it didn't do as well.
Yeah, I
And
feel like it kind of came and went, which is why I'm surprised it did make your top 10. I know that there are people that are ride or die for that franchise and for those movies. And to be fair, I've seen Fury Road almost 10 times now, but like, and
that's
I
saying
just,
something, I think.
it is. I think it's because I want to see what everyone else sees,
Yeah.
right? Like I do genuinely like George Miller because I think from a technical standpoint, I think that movie is immaculate, right? Like, or what he, from a practical
Well, even a
stunts mixed
plot
with,
point, right? Like, it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
simple.
It's simple. And I like a simple movie, don't get me wrong. But then in Fury Road, that's almost something that it takes me out of it, that it's almost so simple I can't get invested in it. Like the stunts aren't enough, the chase isn't enough, even though from a technical standpoint it looks and sounds crazy. And with Furiosa, I haven't gotten around to it because we talked about earlier giving everything a shot, but I also feel like sometimes where it was like, well, I don't care, right? I didn't like Fury Road.
You're Tommy
I
Lee Jones
don't.
in this situation. I don't care.
Yeah, I just like I don't. Here's the thing, I do want to watch it, and I've heard from other people where like they're like, well, I've actually heard people who didn't love Fury Road actually liked Furiosa a lot more, and because it has a little bit more story and its structure, I think interests me from
Yeah.
what I've seen,
It's also
and
chapter based.
that's what I mean. Even I put it on the opening 15 minutes, and in immediately because of a style thing and just how I like movies being structured, I was more intrigued with it because it wasn't just let's put the pedal to the metal and just start. I'm sure the movie maybe gets like that, and
It
maybe
does.
yeah, and I'm sure it's a little similar to Fury Road, and I'd be curious to see how I react there. I do still want to watch it. It's just one that I because of again, I've watched Fury Road in every fucking possible way to give it a shot. Black
Even
and
black
white,
and white.
3D, film, like digital, like IMAX. Like I've seen it in every possible format you could watch it. And every single time, I don't hate the movie. I don't even think it's a bad movie. It's one of those kind of 3 out of 5s for me where I'm like, yeah, I sort of get from like a uh this is entertaining standpoint, but to me it ends there. So I never understood the elevating it to this
You never
kind of
got to the gates of Valhalla.
yeah, like putting it on this pedestal of like, no, well, it's more than just like a fun action movie. And I'm like, I never saw that. So I've tried, I swear to God, I've tried and I want to see it. But I do genuinely like George Miller, just his career as well, going from, populist family movies to the Mad Max franchise to
His
weird
career is bonkers.
offshoots. Yeah, and I always appreciate that. And now the rumors that he
He's
might
doing
do
Thor 5.
4 or 5, and I'm all for that. Even if I
Only
don't
if
like,
Hemsworth is playing his character from Furiosa.
sure, but I think that like not to go too off the rails here, but I think it's relevant to this conversation. Like again, will there be people going, oh my God, he's going to waste 3 years of his life, 4 years of his life doing a Marvel movie? But I'd much rather someone like George Miller, who, yes, has that relationship with Hemsworth, but will have a a voice and a stamp. It's something we always talk about these Marvel movies of like putting your stamp on it and making it yours while still working within the world of the MCU. And I think with Taika Waititi's Thor movies, I understand the need to reinvent that character again, because like I feel like with after Love and Thunder, it was like, okay, that comedic, goofy Thor, we might need to kind of go back to, which obviously didn't work with Dark World and even the first Thor to an extent, of trying to do that Game of Thronesy serious thing. But then I think George Miller, and even what you've seen in with Fury Road and I don't know about Furiosa, but bringing a style and a weirdness that both is serious but fun
but still
and
comedic,
fucked
because
up.
he's
And
very
yes, that's what I mean.
Looney
Yeah,
Tunes
that's what I
style
mean.
filmmaking, right?
So I think that he's almost perfect for it, because I think what people like about the Thor character is that it can be silly, but then the Thor character actually comes from all this Norse mythology and can be quite serious and tragic and sad. And I think he would be a really good choice for it. And then him bringing maybe, these big practical, elements. And ironically, they made that Fury Road episode of What If, right? And so like I'd be very curious to see what his version of Thor 5 would be, even if I didn't vibe with Fury Road and I haven't watched Furiosa yet. But I'm actually glad it made your list, because I just feel like it is one of those movies that I wasn't even sure. I knew you liked it, but
Mhm.
I wasn't sure how much you liked it, and that it lived up to, that very high expectations people had from Fury Road. That's cool.
And it took its own road.
Um,
Like, I think, like, that's the
yeah,
thing as well. Like,
it's
it's
not just a regurgitation of
yeah,
that
and it's
movie,
not
right?
trying to simply just top Fury Road, even though, Fury Road is a shadow over that film, but it doesn't feel like, oh, well, we have to do both the same thing that people are familiar with and also try to top it. Like, it's trying to find its own voice within that world, within the setting. And I kind of appreciate that in terms of prequel storytelling as well, because it's like you don't have to necessarily be beholden to the Mad Max character or the continuity of Mad Max to integrate it. That's the thing with like the Star Wars movies where I'm a little more critical. It's like get away from the Skywalker saga, get away from even the Jedi, like explore the universe, like find a pocket of the world where you don't have to tell a story that's connected in some way or another to
Yeah.
the main continuity of the movies. And so like this, it kind of felt like, yeah, Mad Max still has like a very like small role in terms of like seen from a distance, but other than that it feels like, okay, well, we're really focusing on this character and their journey through the wasteland and not simply connecting it all back, even though there is that connective tissue, but it's not like the first thing they're thinking about. And I think also for Miller, who may or may not do a Thor movie. I mean, obviously, it also depends, like, because Miller is very controlling, and I'm sure he would want final cut of the
That's what
film and
that's the
things
only
like that.
thing that I
But
think
it's
could.
smart for him to do that now because, like, because Furiosa failed. If he does take the Thor gig, it will be a fail safe rebound for him, and so
Mhm.
whatever he wants to do afterwards, he will. So like it's a good kind of like one for me, one for you kind of thing. But in that, he could probably, as long as Kevin Feige allows him to, because it did feel like Kevin Feige after the Eternals was like, I'm never allowing anybody to shoot outside of a
Yeah,
studio
I
again,
know, yeah.
and because Chloe Zhao was like that hope, right? Like Chloe Zhao was like the one where we were,
It sucks that that movie bombed and also wasn't great,
yeah,
because
because you wanted it to be,
and
and you
that's the
really
stuff I
like
do
her
like
as a
about that
director. Yeah,
movie
yeah.
too, right? So you hope that someone like a George Miller, and I think they've been letting, if you look with the Star Wars stuff, especially too, you've seen a little bit of a change in letting people shoot more on location with Andor. And I don't know about Skeleton Crew. I've only watched those first 3 episodes. I do really want to get
Same,
back
which is
to it,
telling
but
because the Daniels
um,
directed the fourth
I know,
episode.
dude, and we haven't gotten there yet. I know. It's one of those things, because I think during the Christmas season and stuff like that, it just kind of we got busy. It wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily like I really liked those episodes, but anyways, well, that's for another day. But I think great choice. I'm glad that I do really want to watch it still. So it's just been hovering on Crave and HBO Max of being like, I do really want to give this a shot.
Yeah, I gotta be true to me, I gotta be, gas guzzling, chrome
Uh-huh.
spraying, nipple
Yeah.
piercing,
Yeah, that's
S&M
you for
loving, like,
sure.
that's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
me in a
That's
nutshell,
you.
so I
Yeah.
gotta have that
Yeah.
represented here.
Yeah, absolutely. My number 6, Flo. Uh, so, just won the Golden Globe for Best Animated
Hell yeah.
Feature. It might be the front runner for Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. I'm not entirely sure,
I
but
hope so.
I hope so too, man, because I think it is a lovely, wonderful little movie made by a very small team out of Norway, I
No,
want to say. No,
Latvia.
sorry, Latvia. Thank you, Eric. And basically, I don't know how to necessarily describe it, but it's completely silent. The main character is this black cat. There is this giant flood that happens in kind of this mystical world that is sort of like the earth that we know, but not really at all. And it's just about these group of animals that get on a boat and kind of navigate through this world. And that's a very vague kind of premise, and you kind of actually have to see it in execution. But saw this at TIFF, was completely blown away with it. From an emotional standpoint, from an animation standpoint, it really reminded me of like some indie kind of video games because it's got this kind of crude art style that is still both really nice to look at because of its production design and it's just design in general, where yes, it doesn't look like a Pixar movie or
It's handmade.
yeah, it feels like it's handmade. And I think like, and that doesn't mean that it looks ugly. It's just got its own unique look that obviously it doesn't have some of the money. Maybe if they had the money a Pixar has, it would look different, but it almost works. I think sometimes your handcuffs when you make a movie can be a good thing, right? Because like it brings you a unique look. And I
Creativity
yeah.
and innovation and having to, use your intelligence and not rely on resources all the time.
And how these group of animals come together and help each other. And my sister has a black cat named Georgie, who is the sweetest cat I've ever met in my life, and that's a little bit of a personal connection, and I really need her to see this movie. It was the one film my mom, I had free tickets to this, so I gave it to my mom and my aunt, and they went and saw it and absolutely loved it and been telling people about it. And yeah, you might think no dialogue. We saw this in The Wild Robot, both at TIFF.
Well,
And
I saw Flow later. I saw a
yeah, but
screener
I
link
mean, they
for it.
both
Yeah.
played TIFF,
Yeah.
yeah, right? And I think Wild Robot is worst case scenario of what Flow could have been, of like a bunch of talking animals
Emotionally manipulative.
yeah, and stuff like that, where I think this is so organic in the way that they let animals be animals, but they have a personality, and you can tell every moment through the looks on their faces and how they interact with the other animals of what their personalities are, whether it's a capybara or this black cat, or I forget what,
There's the lemur, there's the
golden
bird.
retriever. Like it's such a fun mix of different animals, and they all have their own unique personalities and what they're trying to accomplish on this journey just to survive this flood. And then some of the supernatural or mystic elements really kind of caught me off guard as well, which I'm still kind of understanding what the movie was ultimately saying and was about and things like that. But I think I just think let it wash over you like that flood. And I think I think even kids should, you could understand with no dialogue, maybe that their kind of attention spans would wane or something like that. But I think it is beautiful enough. And I think the animals are animated enough, no pun intended, that, or pun very much intended, but that will keep their attention span throughout the whole movie. And I think it is a wonderfully handcrafted, beautiful movie that is up there with the Ghibli and Pixar movies. I think it should stand with like some of those, and I think it is the best animated film of the year by far for me. I mean, Transformers 1 I loved, but very different
Yeah.
movies. Where I
But I
think
like that.
Transformers
I
1
like that
should
you
be in
can
that
have
category
Transformers
too.
1
Yeah.
and Flow.
Like Transformers 1 won't get nominated, I don't think, but it should.
What are we
And
doing? What are we
if we
doing
weren't
here?
cowards, then we would.
Yeah.
But Flow is easily, I think, I hope it doesn't get stolen from it by the Wild Robot or
Or
something like
Inside Out
that,
too.
or yeah, which two, I think, very disappointing animated films where this kind of, came out of nowhere for me, and I thought was great. And I know you recently saw it too, right, Eric? Yeah.
Yeah. The two other animated movies that aren't on my list that I really liked were Chicken for Linda, which is this really lovely French film, and Flow. And Flow, I think when watching it, like the thing that I really enjoyed about it, it actually kind of is almost like a Mad Max movie in a weird way. Like it's
Yeah.
very light on plot. It's about a journey getting from one place to another, but it's also about collaboration,
Yeah.
compromise, and I think like ultimately being okay with asking for help from other
Yeah.
people, and like when you need help, finding people that you can
Look for
trust
it. Yeah.
to band together in a situation that is very harrowing for these characters that like you do care about. I love that the capybara is stereotypically chill and like can get along with everybody on the boat. I love that the golden retriever is trying so hard to be friends with the cat,
With
even though the cat's
everyone.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
having it whatsoever. I love that the lemur is so vain. I love the relationship between the bird and the cat in terms of like what the bird means in terms of what it does to stick up for the cat, and what it ultimately sacrifices in order to help
Yeah.
it. And even like the apocalyptic kind of or dystopian backdrop of it all. Like it is fascinating that you can look at it as a climate change movie. You can look at it as the humans are all dead, which is very
Yeah.
depressing, and have left the animals to their own devices. But like there's an interesting thing about like seeing like there's like a cat statue in one backdrop where it's like, is this our world, or is this a world that is
Yeah.
like an alternate reality? And obviously like none of that necessarily matters. I think like from the filmmaker's point of view, like it is feeling like, okay, you now have a team of people that you're rallying behind you to make something, and you can get this done because other people are there to work with you in order to you know crystallize your vision into something that is real, that is put together. And yeah, it's this little movie that could it's eligible for Oscar nominations for animated feature film, which it will most likely get in, and I really do hope it has a shot of winning. But it's also eligible for Latvia. It's the international
Oh,
submission
really?
as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, so it could
That's
get
great.
two nominations. It actually, you know what? Like, I wouldn't be against it because of the year that it is. I wouldn't even be against it getting in Best Picture, because
Won't happen, but I agree.
I think most people that see this film, I haven't really heard anybody that doesn't at least like the movie. Like maybe it's not their favorite film per se, but like I haven't heard anybody say Flow is bad. And
Yeah.
I love the audacious swing that it takes in being like, it's going to be silent. It's not necessarily that we need to tell you or
What they're saying or
anthropomorphize these
thinking. Yeah.
characters any more
Or
than
even
we need
like
to.
subtitles or something.
Yeah.
It could have easily done something like that, right? Where it's
I wish
just not.
Pixar would do something like this, because Pixar does feel like a company when they first started. Like you look at what Wall-E is, right? Like the first act of Wall-E was a silent film, and it was
Yeah.
so ambitious. And what Pixar has become now versus what it was then feels like a film like Flow, if they were still the studio that was
That
making
made
Wall-E,
Wall-E.
would
Yeah.
be the studio that makes something like Flow. And so for that, like I just love something that isn't afraid to be quiet and to experience the environment as it is.
Yeah.
And like I think you're right, like children maybe would have a hard time with it, but I also think that like it's a watch for them that maybe is a passive thing where they could still tune in when they want to, and the
While they're
characters
playing with something or
yeah,
whatever,
and the
just have it
characters are
on. Yeah.
expressionistic enough that it works, and it's not too frightening for young children to get into, and it won't traumatize them necessarily like Transformers 1 or many Disney movies. Like it, there's still some adult mature themes in terms of like subject matter or references in terms of like what it's trying to convey in terms of the environment and ecology and all of that. But I think like younger children will love that black cat. I think younger
Oh,
kids
yeah.
will love the animal designs in general. It's I've heard some people also compare it to like a screensaver as well. I appreciate that look of that movie because it does feel like, oh, a human being made this and not a studio that has incredibly
Supercomputers,
talented
yeah.
people working on something, but it feels like just a couple people like literally like took some, you know, some string and wood and like tied some stuff together and presented this to the class, and it's like it's completely handmade.
Yeah, because the director, I might be pronouncing this incorrectly, correct me if you know, Eric, but, Gintz Zibalidis,
I
I
I
probably butchered
I
that,
would
but
probably do the same.
but, he's talked about how it very much the movies he's made before this were just him, and, he made a movie, I think, a couple years ago where he was the only person, like, who worked on it. Maybe a few others helped him with certain things, but he said this was like he compared it to him having to learn how to work with a team of people, right? And related to this black cat of being, kind of isolated and to now figure out how to work with these different people. And I thought that was really interesting as well, because now it's this small team making this movie and not just him. But yeah, wonderful, wonderful movie. You guys should, whenever it's available to stream, which I don't know. I know it
Actually,
played in
they just
some
made
art.
an announcement for that. I'm
Did
gonna
they?
look
Because
it
it
up
just
quickly.
it played art house theaters and things
Yeah.
like that. And it was Janus Films, wasn't it,
Yeah,
that
oh, yeah.
released it? Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's going to get a, Blu-ray release down the line as well, which is very nice. So it is actually, it's available now.
Oh,
I'm
awesome.
I'm looking at, Golden Globe winner Flo. I'm looking at the press release. The best animated film of 2024 now available to buy or rent on, Apple
Yes, you
TV,
can buy
Prime
or rent it
Video.
on Apple TV, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Very much worth your
And it's
time, and
only yeah, $7 to rent or 25 to own, but, yeah, definitely worth that rental if you wanna give it a shot.
absolutely. Yeah, really solid pick. I really, again, wasn't in my top 10, but a really wonderful movie that I'm actually very excited to show Ivor at some point. So,
Yeah.
you know, my number 6, I'm getting pretentious again, but it's another Janice film. So we're keeping in line with Janice, as Ryosuke Hamaguchi's follow up to Drive My Car, which is Evil Does Not Exist. This is also another movie that's kind of horror adjacent. It's about this small Japanese community. It's a rural, sort of backdrop where life is very quiet. Everyone knows each other. They're very much, dependent on the land, on the water, on the resources that are natural to them. And then you have this glamping, glamorous camping, um, company that's trying to come in and not necessarily take over and move, and outsource the people, or displace the people, but is trying to integrate, this package vacation to a wider sort of community with people living in the cities, and how there is both pushback to that, but also a feeling like of tension and dread that you don't know where the narrative is going. Hamaguchi was initially supposed to make this into a conceptual piece for a band, but then continued to expand on it after Drive My Car became a big awards contender. And it was almost like his response about like anxiety and feeling as though, you don't know what's going on in your life, or you don't know what's going on within the community, but things are changing within it, and you're trying to, keep the things that are important to you pure. There's a great town meeting sequence where you have the glamping crew talking about, what they're going to change and how they're going to move things in order to accommodate the community, but the uh, corporation doesn't really know like where the reservoir leads into and how that will taint, um, the water and also affect the rest of the ecosystem in order to get food. And the last act of the film is so horrifying, but also dreamlike and surreal, and it leaves you just questioning like what it was about. It's a mood piece. It's about the vibes more so than the plot. There's just something so incredibly both haunting but engrossing about it that you can't look away, but you're also feeling like you could come upon something that will disturb you or frighten you in a way that you're not ready for. It's such a beautifully made movie, and I got to see it. I missed it at TIFF the year that it played. It was one of the few that I regretted, but I saw it at the Lightbox in the smaller theater. I think it's what, Cinema 5 is like the really small one.
Yeah, that really tiny one. Yeah.
It really works in like a small theater environment because it feels very claustrophobic, but also communal in that way. And like you're watching it like a small town, you're watching it with a small audience, and it has this effect on you. So if you have not had a chance to see it, it's available now on Blu-ray. It's also streaming. It is a very it's unlike Drive My Car. So if you're looking at like seeing the follow-up to that movie and wanting the same kind of thing, like we're talking about this with George Miller, with like if you want the same thing with Fury Road, you're not going to get it. But at the same time, you get something that is just, it's hard to put your finger on what the film is. And that is so exciting to me, where you can't, peg what the movie is. You can't, decipher it right away. Like usually when you go into a movie, beyond the marketing, you kind of know what the film is going to be in the first act.
Yeah.
This film continues to question like what kind of movie it is. And for that, like I always love films that will continually, change as they're going, and they're not just one thing. So Evil Does Not Exist is number 6 for me.
Cool. I don't have much to say. Drive My Car. Wasn't my thing, but
That's okay.
this is an interesting one because this I think also kind of came and went. Like I didn't
Yeah.
hear, it played TIFF 2 years ago, right? Didn't it?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then yeah, and I remember it just kind of it being a follow up. I mean, Drive My Car. I remember, liking, maybe thought was too long or whatever, but I just didn't hear much about this. I'm glad you really liked it. I don't. Again, I'm sure it's good. I just it
This I
hadn't really
think you
been on.
would like more. This I
Yeah.
think
Okay.
it's a very like I said, like it's a very different movie from Drive My Car, where it's like I was saying before, like we were talking with Long Legs, like it's more about atmosphere and environment and the vibes than it is necessarily about plot. But it's also not as long as Drive My Car, so if like you're afraid of long running times,
Sure.
you, I think, will.
I watched The Brutalist and Killers of Flower Moon this year, so
Yeah. So like again, I get that. Like if Drive My Car was not your thing and you're thinking, "Oh, am I going to get more of the same from this director?" It's not Drive My Car. It's a very different animal. It's its own thing. It's such a
cool.
strange movie because it is very experimental, but not in the experimental sense where like it's esoteric. It's just like
Yeah.
you're like, what is he trying to say here? But it's really interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
My number 5, a movie that you had on your honorable mentions, one that completely came out of nowhere. The best, CG8 movie of the year, the best, dare I say it, musical of the year.
Another Paramount film.
Another Paramount film, Better Man, the Robbie Williams jukebox musical starring Caesar from Planet of the Apes. It man, I remember when we started hearing about what this movie was during the festival circuit, and I heard it and you're like, "What?" And you're like, "Oh, from the director of The Greatest Showman. That's what he chooses to do next." And you're like, "Robbie Williams jukebox musical." You're like, "Oh yeah, I think I remember Robbie Williams a little bit," or things like that.
This
Rock
guy that sang
DJ and
Millennium.
yeah, stuff like that. And you're like, "Okay, I like jukebox musicals. I thought Rocket Man was great, in recent memory, but I'm like, I don't know." And then you start to go, "Oh, it actually," you hear from people, "it stars a CG monkey," and you're like, "What?" And you're like, "That can't
Oh, and by the
possibly
way,
be good."
Weta is the one that did the
Yeah.
motion capture.
So it's the same team that does the Planet of the Apes films, and shout out to Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I don't think not a great movie, but still an enjoyable entry in that
Solid.
franchise. Solid, but Better Man. So Nevis goes to see it at TIFF. Because and I remember going and going, "Do you know what the concept is?" She's like, "No, I don't." I'm like, very intrigued to hear what you think. She comes out the next day, me and you talk to her, and she's like, "It is phenomenal. It's fantastic. It's so much fun. The monkey thing works completely. It's so good." And I was like, "I still don't believe you." Like I don't believe you. And we didn't even have it on our schedule for
No.
TIFF. We never, even going into the year, it's not something we were like, "Oh, Better Man's coming out." I had no idea it fucking existed before the festival circuit. And because both of us weren't really big fans of Greatest Showman,
No. Although
which I
Michael
thought,
Gracie is an executive producer on Rocket Man as well.
yes. So, and I will, if I say anything positive about The Greatest Showman, I thought it was a series of very good music videos strung together into a movie that doesn't really work.
It sounds
The song,
basically like you're reviewing a complete unknown.
yeah, the songs are great. The performances are great. It's just when you try to make a narrative film out of it, it's not good at all. So I get people are like, "What, the music in Greatest Showman's amazing." It's like, yeah, well, sure, listen to the album or watch the music videos. It's the movie's not very good. Better Man, I think the music is fantastic. The musical performances are excellent. The monkey thing works perfectly, both as a metaphor and just the right amount of weirdness to make the movie stand out on its own, right? Because I feel like if it was just an actor playing Robbie Williams, I think Elton John is Elton John. He's larger than life. He kind of, you have Taron Egerton play him, but he's still Elton fucking John, right? You don't need a gimmick for Elton John.
No.
Robbie Williams, love him, but if it was just British actor playing Robbie Williams, you're kind of like, oh, it's just another jukebox musical biopic, right? The CG monkey is the perfect thing of going, well, this is how I viewed myself, as this kind of dancing monkey, kind of performative monkey for everyone during my time as performing. I think it's such a good metaphor that just works, just like I said, that right amount of weirdness to make the movie stand out. So when you have a monkey doing cocaine and falling in love and singing and everyone's playing it so straight, right? Like it's
Well, because they
never
never
addressed.
address it. Like, that's the thing
Yeah.
that's amazing about it. It's like he's a monkey right from childhood, and it's never addressed. It's never discussed. They just treat him like anybody
He's
else.
never
And it
made fun of that he's a monkey, or
nope.
yeah. Like he's made fun of for other normal reasons, but like it's just he's a CGI monkey, and I think that works perfectly for the movie. And then on top of that, where I think some other musicals didn't quite land, is like the performances, these larger than life choreographed, like fun songs, I think work really, really well. Like the rock DJ performance sequence really stands out. But then there's, throughout the whole movie, I think each one feels unique and different, and just works. And then there's a sequence in the last act of the film as well that I want to point out, where during this kind of final performance, it turns into this kind of action movie. And I think it's a like this violent, like, action movie, and I think it's so good. And I
As
can't say enough.
good or even better than all of the blockbusters we saw this year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it does feel like it's on that scale. Like it's a big R-rated jukebox musical with a budget and good special effects and fun direction. And I just can't believe it exists, and it's as good as it is.
Yeah.
And
Best last line of a movie this year too.
it really is. And so I think Better Man, if you're put off because you're like, you think it looks silly or something like
Or you're
that,
just
like,
not familiar with Robbie Williams,
yeah,
because I think North American audiences really like, he is a big deal internationally and
yes,
worldwide, but he never cracked the code to be popular in North America. And I think like Millennium is like the one song that a lot of people, if they do remember him, will remember, oh yeah, that played a lot in the late 90s, and was like the one song that they tried to make a crossover hit. And his experiences with Take That, and his dealings with a father that abandoned him as a child, and dealing with his own self-worth and imposter syndrome, and mental illness. It's all there. But I also really love that he's an asshole. He is a
Yeah.
complete
And
and
they
utter
embrace that, right?
fucking asshole, to the point where he has a god complex. And even if you don't like Robbie Williams, I would still recommend seeing this movie, because the film is really unflattering at times, and he's very honest about it. It's his voiceovers, and I think, like, when we first saw the movie at TIFF, like, we were confused about it as well, because there wasn't a lot of information on the film at that point. But they're Robbie Williams's voiceovers, which he recorded with Michael Gracie at his studio in LA. But the performance of the character is by John O'Davies, who deserves a lot of credit for what he's doing in the motion capture performance. To me, Robbie Williams and this movie is what I like, the best version of, like, what I think Deadpool fans like out of Ryan Reynolds. Like, he's such a self-serving, egotistical maniac. But what I love about Robbie Williams is that he's completely himself. Like, it doesn't feel like he's being anybody but himself. He's not
Yeah.
pretending to want you to like him the way that Ryan Reynolds, I think, wants you to like him, or like to
Sure.
like undercut you with an emotional moment that you're not expecting. And like that, for that, like, I like Robbie Williams, for me, it's like, I should not like this guy,
Yeah.
but I
But
love
you
him.
do.
I kind of
People
like,
who own who they are,
yeah.
you almost appreciate them for it, right? You might not always like how they act or who they
Yeah,
are
or agree,
sometimes,
like,
but
with everything they do, but like, like, again, and I know we're promoting the show now a little bit, but like, I had 5 minutes talking to him, and 5 minutes talking to Michael
you should
Gracie. So,
promote it. Yeah.
if you want to check that out on our show and listen to that interview, even in that 5 minutes talking to him, he's very much, you get exactly what you see
Yeah.
with Robbie Williams. And that, I kind of love this guy. Like,
No, I agree.
there's a
Yeah.
part of you that's like, and I also think there is an emotional element to this movie that really works quite well, in terms of his relationship with his nana, and how,
Yeah.
like, there's a love there that feels like, the nana talks about, like, you're enough for who you are, you don't have to be anybody else. And that, like, hit me emotionally in a way, because, like, I had such an amazing relationship with my grandfather and my nana growing up, that I think, like, anybody that is lucky enough to have that kind of relationship with their grandparents can really connect with that element of the story in a way that's what I wanted to talk to him about. And it was really nice hearing what he had to say about that. So, like, I think it is the movie where it's like, we could not have predicted this film doing as well as it has, for us, in terms of, like, our response to it. But I think also, like, there was a skepticism going into it, not necessarily even because of the film, but because of all of these biopic movies that we're getting, these musical biopics about famous musicians, where it's like,
Mhm.
Timothy Chalamet is playing Bob Dylan, Rami Malek wins an Oscar for fucking Bohemian Rhapsody. And so there's that skepticism that comes through when you hear, oh, they're doing this person. Like, we're going to be talking this year, not on, I don't think on our top 25 list, but like,
Well, we'll bring it up. It might not make the
no,
list,
but we'll have this same conversation that we're having, not like best or worst, but like, in terms of a review about Nebraska, or the Bruce Springsteen
yeah.
movie. Like, it just feels like, okay, we're
Who's playing Springsteen?
Jeremy Allen White.
Right,
And
right,
so
right,
we
right.
get one of these every year, and like, even the Amy Winehouse movie, which was terrible, nobody remembers, and they shouldn't remember. Like, we get one of these kind of films every year now, and it's all about the performance. It's all about the actors, and the filmmaking is usually secondary to it all. So getting something that feels both like the music works, but also the filmmaking, the story itself, like, the plot is very conventional. Like, it is
Sure.
still a very conventional
I
biopic,
agree.
but that slight tweak changes everything enough, and it
It's
makes
what we
you wish
talk
that
about.
Bob Dylan was played by a
Yeah,
monkey.
you need something to stand out, to your point, because there's so much, right? And we always talk about this. If it's just a cradle to the grave kind of like Wikipedia article, musical biopic. That just they're a dime a dozen. They're all the same, right? Yeah, some of them are musicals, some of them just have a lot of music. That's kind of the main difference, right? So you either need to find a moment in someone's life that is very interesting and showcase that, or you need to have some sort of gimmick that makes you stand out from the crowd. And the gimmick can't just be a gimmick, right? Like the gimmick here does make sense with the way he talks about how he feels like he was portrayed. And that metaphor, while on the nose and kind of, obvious, just again, like we said, brings that slight kind of intrigue to go, this is just weird enough, and lets you do that sequence at the end, what we're talking about with the action sequence, right? That would, if that was a human doing all of that stuff, it would maybe be off-putting or weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, and where when you have an ape doing it, you're thinking of Planet of the Apes, your suspension of disbelief, and you let this fantastical moment happen, which lets it stand out from the rest of the biopics that we get. That I feel like it just absolutely nailed it and is really, really great.
And they went straight to Weta. Like they could have easily been like, oh, we'll just do a knockoff version and half-heartedly do a post-production thing where
But
we
no,
make
they
it
spent the money
and the
did it.
years. Like Michael
Yeah.
Gracie spent like 2.5 years putting this thing together. So like the level of commitment to, create something that is as good looking visually speaking as it is. Like this is, like you said, it was Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. Like the effects are just as good as any of the motion capture Planet of the Apes movies. There are more, the design of Robbie Williams in this is more sympathetic, and I think that's by choice because
Totally.
usually apes in movies are usually vilified, like in terms of like the look of
Koba.
those characters. Yeah, exactly. So you make a character like that. Like obviously Caesar is sympathetic and a very,
Yeah.
complicated character, but I think making him look not only like Robbie Williams, but make him look, kind and vulnerable, I think is strategic in its design. Also one of the greatest Oasis jokes I think
Oh, there's some really
ever.
good shit
And
in
Rachel
there.
Bano I think is really good as
Yeah,
Nicole Appleton from
I
All
agree.
Saints. I think
Agreed.
really I love movies that surprise you this way, like films that are not on your radar whatsoever, like a Flow, like a Better Man, like films that just you just don't have any expectations for whatsoever.
Yeah. You're number 5.
So my number 5, it's a challenging movie. It's a film I kind of grappled with putting on this list because it's like, is it a 2024 release? It doesn't even have distribution. It's not an easy movie to watch right now, especially it's going to polarize people no matter
Right.
what. And it's the documentary No Other Land, which is from a collective of Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers who are looking at this small village in the West Bank that is being taken over by the Israeli government. It's a Palestinian village, and we see this Israeli journalist work with an activist from Palestine, and how these two people are able to put aside any of their differences and show you kind of what's going on. And the film kind of builds up to where we are right now. I saw it at TIFF and I found the experience to be, I couldn't breathe at times, Matt. Like there were times where like I was either holding my breath or like I
Yeah.
felt like everybody else in the room felt so tense watching this, because you're experiencing it now, like, through news, through conversations, through like what is going on, and um, how do you approach a situation like this, and who has the moral rights, and who is right, and should you even be talking about this, because two men who are, I would basically say, agnostic slash, border, like we're both baptized, we're both Christians,
Sure.
so like our perspective on things, like I'm atheist, but like I was baptized, so like my perspective on things is like I don't want to add commentary to something that I do not know the nuances of, or feel like this is just another white dude, Christian white dude, or atheist,
Yeah.
like adding that. But watching this movie I think is worth anybody's time, and you get a sense of like what's going on a level that isn't necessarily just geopolitical. Like it's in the moment of like, oh, this is a small community affected by something. And I feel like small communities are popping up a lot in my movies, with the films that I like this year, with like, Evil Does Not Exist, and this, obviously this is a very different kind of thing. But the last act like hits you so hard, you feel the frustration, you feel like the tension as things are going on. um Anybody that is suffering or oppressed deserves to have their voice heard, and
Absolutely.
it needs the help that they need. And this is a film that, it's just so strange to me that no distributor wants to take something like this on, which has been critically acclaimed since it played Berlin. um I get that it is a tough watch, and it is
Yeah.
something that will be divisive, but at the same time, I think every movie deserves its day in court, like Juror Number Two. And this is a movie that I think should be available to everybody. And with that, I just think that maybe this being on my list is me being, like, this is my version of like making a statement of being like,
Yeah,
okay,
it should have come out this year,
yeah,
because now no one picked it up because
but it still
I
could be nominated for
yeah,
documentary at the Oscars. Like, it's still eligible.
good.
So,
And yeah, I agree with you there. And yeah, yeah, you hope it does get distribution. And maybe if it does get nominated or even wins or something like that hopefully does help, gives it a platform. And that's when we talk about awards not meaning anything or very silly. I think in cases like this, where, you want to put a spotlight on an important issue or a movie that's kind of challenging or isn't getting distribution because of political reasons and things like that, then and for even for you in a top 10 list, you saw it this year, it played festivals this year. Yes, it's very silly when we go, well, what are your rules of what makes your list? Like, it doesn't matter. It's whatever your personal list is. You can put whatever you want on it. I can put X-Men 97 or Dragon Ball Superhero on my list if I really wanted to. Or you can put important things like this that need a spotlight. And hopefully people have I guess, like, there could always be self-distribution or just release it digitally or something like
yeah.
that, right? Which might end up happening. But
But it's just a
hopefully
shame
it
that
gets
like a
released. Yeah.
smaller, whether it be like, you know, again, it's a hot topic. It's very polarizing, and I feel like no matter what, like whoever handles it is going to get a lot of flack,
Yeah,
from
from either side,
side.
right? No
Yeah,
matter what stance a movie's taking. And that, unfortunately, that's the reason why no one wants to touch it, right?
yeah.
Because you don't want to seem like unfortunately, no one wants to seem like they're choosing a side,
But
right? So
it's also so weird that it's like that's a movie that is having trouble getting distribution, but I want to see, because it's like the vulgar tourist thing in me, but like we're all okay with Mel Gibson's Flight Risk
yeah,
getting a wide release, and like that's okay, but this isn't. Like that is a strange thing to me.
yeah. I mean, I guess what a movie's saying versus what a person said at one time. I don't know. I'm just trying to
No, I know. It's
out
just
loud
it's always interesting. It's like what is acceptable and
what
what's
gives a
not, and,
pass
and
and what.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. Okay. Moving on from that, my number 4, talking about Emma Stone producing something, Jesse Eisenberg's A Real Pain, a movie I came to pretty late this year. It was one that you suggested to me. I remember missing the screening and you were like, no, I think you'd really like this. I think obviously Kieran Culkin getting a lot of praise for his performance in the movie, and he's fantastic.
He's not wetting
Eisenberg,
the bed anymore.
yeah, he was at WWE Raw, actually. Both him and Macaulay Culkin were at. I can't wait to talk about that. That's a whole separate thing. I'm going to do a whole episode on my trip. But I was in that pre-party before WWE Raw.
Oh, was he there?
Yes, everyone was. And I'm in this room. I'm in this room and like Seth Green and Macaulay Culkin, and they're like, you know, just for me, I'm like, oh, it's Seth Green, or like Michael Che's getting a drink at the bar, and I'm like, I am not cool enough to be in this room. And
No,
like
you are, Matt. You are.
and
You
it
know
was
your shit when it comes to this, but you're an intelligent guy.
yeah,
You've
I know.
earned every
But it's just
opportunity.
funny being in this room with people that you've either, you know, I watched Home Alone for the 400th time last week,
Yeah.
right? And like it's like
Or being a
Macaulay
big Scott
Culkin's right over
Pilgrim
there.
fan, right?
Yeah, I know. And then like just being in the room with all these people, and those are even like the tip of the iceberg. Like if you looked at who was at WWE
Tip
Raw,
of the
there's
Eisenberg.
yeah, tip of the Eisenberg wasn't there.
That would be
But
amazing.
yeah, but like just the group of celebrities that are in this pre-party and like influencers, and then I'm there by myself in my Stone Cold Steve Austin t-shirt, and I'm like, it was such a surreal, funny experience that I can't wait to go into more detail about to tease things. But Kieran Culkin was at WWE Raw. He had a nice moment with CM Punk. Your brother's a huge CM Punk fan, and
Oh yeah.
who I talk about wrestling all the time. So CM Punk and Kieran Culkin both had a great moment because CM Punk won in the main event. He beat Seth Rollins. And he goes over and he like shakes Kieran Culkin's hand after, and there's video of this. And he's like, didn't you win something yesterday? He's like, yeah, I won a Golden Globe yesterday. And he's like, I won tonight too. And then they both like, hey. And then like, it was this very funny moment. Anyways, a real pain. I thought just a really raw kind of a fantastic performance from both men, but especially Kieran Culkin, and a character that both characters I found myself really personally connecting with and understanding both of their personalities, and feeling like it was almost not a devil angel on my shoulder situation, but these two halves of my own personality that I saw coming out into this movie. And yeah, maybe I didn't necessarily like their backgrounds and things like that. I don't, you know, have the opposite side of it with a German family background, but like I just these two men going back and that have reconnected and lost touch as they got older, but they were close when they were younger, these cousins, and just their one being super anxious and kind of overthinks everything, and one guy who's loose and emotional and I just really landed with me both those characters and those performances, and then the backdrop of going to Poland and traveling through Europe is always something that I always love is traveling to Europe with my wife, and yeah, I just really emotionally just was really devastated in just being like saw myself in these two characters. And I think when you have that personal connection to a movie and there's some sadness there, but also some hopefulness, and yeah, I just really thought this was a wonderful little movie.
Yeah, I again, it didn't make my top 10, but I think like I really like Jesse Eisenberg's first film as a director. When you finish Saving the World with Julianne Moore and Finn Wolfhard, and I think I was maybe like one of 5 people that liked it. And then this, it's like you're seeing something from him that is, you know, is more commercial in terms of like what it's portraying. It played at Sundance earlier this year, and so it had been talked up a lot, especially when Searchlight picked it up, which I believe actually it'll be available on Disney Plus in Canada at least, and probably in the US on, I think it's January
Hulu
16th.
probably,
Hulu,
right?
yeah. The thing that surprised me the most about this movie, like it's also very emotional in the sense of like you have these two cousins that used to be closer, that, you know, are reuniting because their grandmother passed away and they want to revisit her roots and also explore, you know, Judaism and the Holocaust, and get to know more about that side of their life that they're not as familiar with.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, they reconnect, and, you know, you see the ups and downs of the frustrations of somebody played by, you know, Kieran Culkin's character, who's, you know, a little bit more of a wild card, and not medicating himself properly, and completely both the life of the party and can charm the pants off of anybody and is so memorable, and it's just like infectious and how likable he is, but then also can be completely self-destructive to the point where he makes everybody feel awkward and uncomfortable and ruins it, but still is like still more like you envy him for that because you want to be him. And then the Eisenberg performance was the one that surprised me the most, because I've never seen that amount of vulnerability from him as an actor, especially in the one moment where Culkin,
the restaurant scene,
goes to the washroom and then at the very end is playing the piano.
That monologue is great.
You think like he's gonna come in and like hear some of it, but it doesn't play that way. And so when you see like Eisenberg kind of like just bearing his soul in that moment, it's unlike anything he's done as an actor. Because for him, like Eisenberg's great. Like I always love Eisenberg outside of the Zack Snyder DCU movies, but like he's known as being a very smart, very perceptive asshole type. Like him and Edward Norton are like you need someone to play like an intellectual a-hole. Those are the guys you go for.
Sure.
Here he shows something of maturity and vulnerability and what sort of masculinity is in the 21st century. And you see him so concerned for Culkin's character, but he can't do anything because Culkin's character doesn't necessarily want to help himself either. Like he's at a place where it's like, I'm there for you. I will be there for you whenever you need me. I will support you, but you have to make that leap yourself. You have to want to have it. You have to want to get help. And like, I think like, the physical slap in this movie that happens later, like it represents part of that as well. Like it feels like really important that it comes full circle in the way that it does. The only thing I don't like about this movie is that Kieran Culkin is a co-lead and not a supporting part. Like that's the thing when it comes to award season. Like I love that he's getting his flowers and like to me, like he deserved, I think, awards consideration for Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Always kind of been like underrated, but like there, and like when you see him in something, you're like, oh, that's Kieran Culkin. I really enjoyed seeing him again. And I think Succession
obviously brought his profile way up.
Exactly. Like he's no longer Igby Goes Down. He's Kieran Culkin from Succession. And obviously that did a lot of great work for a lot of actors that have always, maybe outside of Jeremy Strong, who I'm not the biggest fan of, but have done good work. Like even Brian Cox's career, like a guy who's been working forever.
Star of X-Men Origins Wolverine.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, X2 he's really good in. But
oh wait, that's who he's in X2.
Liev Schreiber and Danny Houston. Danny Houston plays Stryker in that movie.
I knew it was a X-Men movie.
Yeah. But somebody who is like just literally like been around forever and then like gets like this late career boost from that show. So I can see like almost like that residual love of, the show ended at probably the right time. I it's one of the few shows I have only watched the first season of, so I haven't finished it, but like him getting that attention is great. I just feel like it is a lead performance and not supporting. And in the same way, like saying like Tom Hulce and Amadeus is supporting to F. Murray Abrams. They were both co-leads and they both got nominated for best actor.
I'd even argue Kieran Culkin's the lead and Jesse Eisenberg.
Well, it begins and ends with Kieran Culkin. Like that's it begins and ends with Benji. Like it's like that's how it is. But that's a different conversation in general, but it is strange when you have like it's like the Judas and the Black Messiah thing where like the two leads of the fucking movie are nominated for supporting actor. It's like, well, who's the lead of the film?
They're both supporting because neither of them are the leads,
even though the title of the film refers to both of these men. So it's like, who are
It's great.
It is. And Emma Stone, amazing. Thank you for just being a great producer.
Like Eric mentioned, it's on I think Hulu and Disney Plus in the next week or two. So I think it is one of those under the radar kind of movies that people will probably catch on streaming. And I think it's a perfect streaming kind of movie that I think you could throw on a weekend. And if you want something a little bit more raw and emotional, but not
like funny. WWE raw.
Yeah, sure. Yes. But then it all comes full circle. Anyways, Real Pain's great. Your number 4.
My number 4, I think, is a film we're going to be talking about a little bit more So I won't say
I
too.
mean, no, say it, and if it's on my, I'm assuming it's on my list.
Oh yeah, it's The Brutalist.
Okay, so I'll just come out here and say I could spoil. It's my number. I think it's my number one of the year. I've been fighting back and forth between this and one other movie that I'm sure will also come up soon.
Oh yeah.
So we could talk about it now. Yeah, I love The Brutalist, but you go ahead.
Yeah, this, we both loved Vox Lux, and I think the year that we saw that in the theater, we saw that at Roy Thompson Hall.
Justice for Corbet.
Yeah, Corbet's Sorbet Shop. Let's get it happening. We loved that movie, and it was very weird, and also chapter based and
Stylistic, just
stylistic,
yeah.
and also looked at like how tragedy impacts a fictional figure that still very much feels real, and rooted in reality. And for this epic story that is about art versus commerce, assimilation, anti-Semitism, post-World War II trauma, historically speaking, the idea of owning art and owning the artist, and where America is, a place that's coming out of, in World War II, that was battling fascism, but then entering capitalism and dispelling the American dream as a myth. All of these things swirl together in this 3.5 hour epic that is big and bold and bifurcated by two parts, but also has um an epilogue that is very divisive. I think the first half is stronger than the second half, but the second half by no means is a slouch. I think Felicity Jones on rewatch is even better in that second half, who's more of just a presence, felt. But it's Adrian Brody's best work, I think, of his career. Obviously, the comparisons and connections to The Pianist are there. Hungarian versus a Polish, Jewish sort of man that's coming into his own and trying to figure out how to survive a situation. But with his Hungarian architect Laszlo Toth, you do just feel like every frame of this movie is very much his, and his battle with this asshole industrialist played by Guy Pearce, who
Who
is
is incredible.
phenomenal in this movie,
Yeah.
is just like, you are just glued to the screen. And for a movie that is 3.5 hours with this baked in intermission that's a countdown clock to 15 minutes, um you don't feel the length. You really don't.
No, it's shocking. It's yeah, I echo everything that you're saying. It is my number one film of the year. It's so wonderful to see Corbet, kind of come out of. He's always been successful as an actor, and even his first two films have its fans. But to see him have this moment, and this movie have this moment that is this 3.5 hour American, epic that on paper, he even talked about it in his Golden Globe speech. Like no one thought it would work, right? And no one wanted to make the movie. And I'm so glad that it exists. It's his vision. I love that it's bringing these actors like Brody and Guy Pearce, who are great actors, but have kind of not. I don't want to say fallen off,
They've been
but
in
they've kind of
DTV land for
yeah.
quite a bit
So, and it
recently.
shows you like a lot of the times when you fall into that direct to TV land that we just mentioned, like you can stay there, right? And it's hard to escape it. But
Yeah.
um to have someone like, this was supposed to have a completely different cast when it was originally going to be made. And maybe it was a blessing in disguise when you have to kind of pivot and get these different actors. But yeah, Brody and Pierce are you go, oh fuck, these guys still got it and they are great. And again, Corbet, and you brought this up a little bit in your interview with him. Um, he talked about how it's just the way that he thinks about structuring a movie, and it's just natural to him. But like, it's exactly what I love about movies, and it is this novelistic approach. And Tarantino does it. Obviously, it's very different in his way, but of looking at it, there are these big long movies, but if you're gonna make a big long movie, you mentioned it, how it doesn't feel long. Like I think comparing it to Killers of the Flower Moon that I just watched, that was a little bit more of a struggle at that runtime for me. I think a structure is such a huge part of making these movies and pacing. And I think when you look at it and break it up into that prologue, epilogue, chapters, intermission, stylistic credits, and all this stuff put together. And then you have this big epic story this big epic adult story that could be very dry and boring, but the way that it's told is completely enthralling, and the way that it's shot. And I think the score does a lot of heavy lifting too, to make it all feel like it's just working in harmony together, right?
That
Where
main theme by
like,
Daniel
that
Blumberg.
is incredible, and, like, it just brings this epic feel, like, when you have all these pieces come together, and it's so amazing because I saw it in Vox Lux. I saw it when I went back and saw Childhood of a Leader, because like, Vox Lux made me go, "Who the fuck is this guy?" And I knew Brady Corbet from his, acting and stuff like that. He's a great character actor as well, but,
Yeah, that one
um
year at TIFF where he's in everything in
in everything,
2014.
right? And he's had a great career since he was a kid, but for this guy to now have this voice and this style, and to bring that, and say what you want about the auteur theory and things like that. Like, yes, it's very much a collaborative experience, and I don't think any of these guys would deny that. But having this style that you've consistently used throughout your films, and I love when people put their stamp on a movie, and you see those three films and they're from this guy, and from those sweeping kind of now a drone shot, helicopter shot, or what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
the street or the train tracks or the whatever. And it's like, with the credits that are so interesting to look at, like, every little detail is thought about. And I love the quote he said, whether it was in your interview or someone else's, or just something I was reading, where he's like, it's so hard to make a movie. Why make a mediocre or bad one, right? Like, you have to put everything into it, and make it good. And I think he's shown that in all. And yeah, Vox Lux, Childhood of a Leader, a little bit more divisive, or maybe he's gone kind of under the radar. But I'm so glad that he's getting this moment, and I cannot wait to see what he does next. And I also love this collaboration he has with his wife,
Yeah,
where
Mona
he's kind of,
Fastvold.
yeah, where he's kind of alternating between, writing a film with her for him, and writing a film with her for her, and then kind of, producing her film, and stuff like that too. So The Brutalist is incredible. It's one of those 3.5 hour movies that I would suggest to anyone because of its structure, and try to see it in 70 millimeter, or try to see it on film. And even if you can't, go see it digitally. But like, it's, the way he was managed to shoot that movie and make it look so much bigger than it even is from its budget and stuff like that. And it's just a really engaging story. I agree with you. The first half's probably better than the second half. I like the epilogue. I think its production design is immaculate as well. Like, it is just
It's
a mon
intellectually stimulating.
it's a monumental movie, and I don't use that. Um,
In jest.
uh, yeah, I really think that, and it is
It
my
feels big
num
and important, and
yeah,
it's aware of that. And like, I think sometimes, like you were mentioning, you were touching on this, like, I think sometimes filmmakers are maybe afraid to, you know be too confident or overly confident, or to present themselves in a way where, like, we're making this movie because, Francis Ford Coppola once talked about this. It's funny because this is I think what he wanted Megalopolis to be. um you know uh, where, like, people will hate you if you make a pretentious movie and it
yeah,
fails.
yeah,
This takes those swings, and if you don't like it, you don't like it, that's fine. But like, it goes for it. Like, it's not afraid to be like, I'm literally showing you this is what I'm doing. I'm paying tribute to the films of the studio system of America, cinema, and Hollywood in the 1960s and 70s. And this is going to be me, going all out. And for a film, it's also funny and ironic that, like, part of the conversation is the budget of this movie being, about like $10 million, but it's a conversation about art and commerce again. And so, like, even that is intertwined even within, like, the narrative of this of the story outside of the film. There's this feeling as though, like, that's the other important part of this movie is Lowell Crawley's cinematography in the film. The VistaVision, the experience of seeing the movie theatrically, what this movie means, watching it on a big screen, what it means to see it if you are in a city that is projecting it on film. Like the way that like you see the opening shot of the Statue of Liberty in that single take sequence, or the way that he shoots roads in Pennsylvania. I love all the scenes with uh Brody and Alessandro Nivola, who plays his cousin. Talk about a real pain kind of
Oh
moment,
yeah, yeah.
where you see what assimilation does and how, it can turn
What a
its
year
back.
that guy had too, and just showing up in random things and
I know,
being
between Craven
wildly
the Hunter
different.
and The Room Next Door as well. He's really underrated as an actor too. But like that whole chunk of the movie at the beginning is so impactful in terms of like how it uses shadows and how you can take interior shots and make them look as grand or as epic as any of the sequences you mentioned before, like that, that overhead bird's eye view of the train. And like there's just so many great moments. Yeah, I think maybe the one place it does lose me a little bit is that it does everything so well of showing you, but then it kind of like tells you in the last act what the movie is.
Sure, yeah.
But that's not enough to be like, oh, this whole movie is ruined, because I rather have this big, bold, ambitious movie that maybe there is like a part of the room that has an imperfection, because that's like art in general. Like the things that we love the most aren't completely perfect.
Yeah.
There is an imperfection, and that's what makes things, in your mind perfect, because they have things that aren't completely off. There's a crack in the wall, or, there's a dent somewhere. And even with this, it's like, with Fastfold's filmmaking as well, like I highly recommend people, you mentioned Vox Lux and Childhood of a Leader for Courbet, but I also recommend people go back and see her first film, The Sleepwalker, which has Courbet in one of the lead roles along with Christopher Abbott, and then also The World to Come with Vanessa Kirby and Catherine Watterson. They're both really great movies. They also worked together, Courbet and Fastfold, on her next film, which is a musical about a cult leader called Anne Lee, which I think might make an appearance on our top 25 of most anticipated films of 2025. Because anything that this guy's going to do from now on, moving forward, is going to be in the same category of anticipation as a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, as a Christopher Nolan film. It feels like this
Mhm.
is his coming out party in a
I
lot of
agree
ways.
completely, and it's so so exciting to see, and I cannot wait to see what he does next, especially if this goes on to, I hope, win Best Picture. I mean, we'll see,
At
but
least director. I think
yeah.
he's got director in the bag. I honestly think that this is like truly a director's film.
Um, Sorry, I'm just texting Nevis because I was helping her check into her flight for tomorrow. So, but I will go into, it's my number 3, right? Is that what we're at? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Or no, we're at
uh,
4. That was my number 4. Or did
no,
you say no?
it's,
You said
I
Real
did number
Pain.
Real Pain was 4. My number 3 is Dune Part 2, or I will just say Dune in general because now it's one film. Um, I I've done a complete
Unknown?
180
A complete unknown?
on this movie, on the Dune franchise in general. I talk about a monumentous movie and just a gigantic movie that I think works both from as an action movie, as a drama. I think its emotional stakes work. Its performances are wonderful. Its IMAX cinematography, its score. Um, Kind of weird that something like this is now seemingly much like Furiosa, just kind of was like, oh, okay, it was another one of those movies from a great director, and it's
Even more
kind of,
so for this though, right? Because it
yeah.
is a best picture. Like the first half is best picture nominated. It won a bunch of awards for below the line craft. It came out earlier, and that's always the problem with a lot of these movies. But it's stranger for a film like this because it is such a phenomenon and it is such a big movie. Denis Villeneuve probably is not going to get a directing nomination for the film, which,
Yeah.
you know, I guess they're thinking like it's a Return of the King thing where they'll wait for Dune Messiah, but Dune Messiah is such a strange book that I don't know how he's going to pull that
How it's
off,
going to, like, yeah,
at least in terms of
work with
being
them.
commercial.
That's what I mean, right? And this is that perfect blend of auteur and commercial, and I think Denis Villeneuve is one of the, best working, guys in Hollywood, and I think he kind of proved that here. And for him to make this movie and make me completely change my stance on part 1 and now the movie as a whole, I think is very, very impressive. And I mean, we've talked a lot about Dune. We don't need to go into a ton more about it, but I think it's kind of strange to me that it's like, oh, well, we gave it praises during part 1. So part 2 is like where I would have thought it would have been the opposite, or should be the opposite, right? Where it's like, now it's a complete movie. Like, it's same with Wicked, what's going to happen
Ugh.
this year.
But that's the
And
problem
it,
with these movies in general, right? Like when
yeah,
you do that, when you divide a film into two halves, it's like, is it its own movie or is it two parts? Like I even think like Kill Bill never got the recognition it deserved, but I think that's kind of also what deterred people at that point, because when you call something
yeah,
volume 1 or volume 2, or even like with the Mission Impossible, movies, or Spider-Verse, like they changed the titles for those films, or Wicked not omitting part 1 in the first movie, because they know that might be a deterrent to people. That might be something that is like, oh, well, I don't want to only see half a film.
have studios not learned from that yet, though? Like,
They
why?
are. They kind of
Wicked
are.
was
They're
never
hiding it. They're hiding it.
I know, but Wicked was never marketed as part 1, and then when you see the movie, it says part 1, and then part 2 gets changed to For Good, just like Dead Reckoning part 1, and now the Final Reckoning with
We'll never get
it's hap
Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2.
I
We'll have to wait for that
appreciate
movie
Dune.
forever.
I appreciate Dune committed to it and stuff like that. But why not just, you could have called it Wicked and never had part 1 on it, and then just always called the second. I think we're never going to get a part 1, part 2 thing anymore, because I feel like it's always just going to be different subtitles. That being said, who gives a shit? But I think Dune is excellent. Can't wait for Messiah. I think it's yeah, it's a gigantic, probably the biggest movie
Oh, it's a
on my
beefy boy.
list, and I think it's great. Yeah,
Yeah, it didn't make my top 10 either, but I still really liked it, and I still am mixed on part 1 because it does feel like it's all set up.
totally.
Like if it was a TV series, not Dune Prophecy, but if it was like an actual TV series, I would get that more because you're taking time to set things up. But when you're making a film, part of it is set up, especially for world building, but then the other part of it is telling the story. And so this half feels like, oh, we're finally telling the story, not plot. We're telling the story here because we've set everything up. We're now just like literally go, 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 go.
Yeah,
Timothy Chalamet's having a pretty amazing year. With this and A Complete Unknown, and even Wonka from the year before, this kind of feels like it is cementing his movie star status in the way that like
totally,
Tom Cruise is, or like that way where moving forward, everything that he does will not only be a film that is driven by just his name recognition, but studios will go out of their way to greenlight projects because he wants to make something. So I'm very excited about Marty Supreme. I think maybe that also might make an appearance on our top 25
Emma
of
Stone
25.
produced.
He's got a sweet mustache. So good for him. I really love um, Javier Bardem in that movie quite a bit. Kind of amazing in the movie. An amazing year for Zendaya as well. I think it's the other actor this year where, like, before I never had anything against her, but I always felt like, oh, is she just like a manufactured movie star and I'm supposed to like her because everybody tells me she's great? And then you watch this, but then you watch my number 3 movie,
And watch my number 2 movie, so you might as well go into it.
and you watch Challengers, and you're
Yeah.
like, Zendaya is a fucking movie star.
Yeah, she is. And those 2 movies are exactly what I echo everything that you're saying. Those 2 movies have also convinced me that she is a gigantic movie star, and she's phenomenal. Yeah, go into Challengers. It's my number 2.
Challengers, this literally, Matt, when we were watching this, I wanted to bottle the electricity that this
Yeah,
movie gave us because it was dynamic. it was sexy, it was funny. You know, it had every element going for it. It made me want a churro in the worst possible way. You know, maybe we could reenact that scene together. Um, eh, Josh O'Connor, the scumbag of the year. We're talking about people that can be unlikable, but still kind of have like a quality
Sort of
to them.
cheer for them. Yeah.
Again, this is like, you know, like I know it's the same thing, but like he should be in the best actor or supporting actor
This
conversation.
whole movie should be in the best everything.
Editing, cinematography, that score by Reznor
The
and
only
Ross.
thing it will be is the
The
score, right? Like,
maybe if it's like the script. That script is incredible. The way that it takes flashbacks and moves everything or structures it around this one match.
and the back and forth between their
Phenomenal.
relationship and mimicking the match that they're having in
Best
the
last
Challenger
act,
tournament.
I think, of
Oh, it's so
2024
good. It's
by
so
far.
good.
It is amazing. Luca Guadagnino, man, that direction, he's just like, you know what? I am going all out on this. And another movie, and I guess pun intended, balls to the wall film where he's just like, you know what? I'm going to have fun with this. I am going to make the best tennis movie ever. It does not matter that you know a thing about tennis. I am just going to be like, this is like any sports movie. And you know what? He's just one of those best filmmakers working right now, and a guy that just is not stopping, like literally going from one thing to another. He has 2 films in the same year. I didn't love Queer as much, but I really
Yeah.
respected that it was a very different movie from a
Oh, and a
lot of
big
the same
swing, right?
people
Yeah.
who made challengers. And that's always exciting, where it's like, we're not going to just give you the same thing. We can work together on other things, but you know, we can make something that is commercial and fun and flirty and just amazing. Like, again, like superstar performances here. Just yeah, this is the movie that kept me going throughout most of the year,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
agree.
and
It
for
was
that
that fist
alone,
bump
I'm
movie that I alluded to earlier. This and Transformers 1 are the most recent, like, me turning to you going, "Fuck yeah," like, fist pumping, like, at the
you
end of
need
it.
this movie to remind you why you love film so much, because you
Yeah.
know, like you said, like I really appreciated that it's like you're, you know, you want to watch things that you're interested in, you know, you want to go to things that you want to spend the time with. Like sometimes there's a feeling of obligation because you're a critic and you want to be, you know, in the know and have a pulse on like what's going on now. But there's another part of you that feels like, why am I doing this again? You get lost in the forest, you get lost in the woods, and then you watch something like this and you're like, that's why I fell in love with film. That's why I fell in love with this medium. This is why I love doing what I do. And it's, you know, nice when it's also purely entertaining. You know, we watch a lot of great movies that I think are great films, but are also challenging watches in the sense of, you know, they require more from you emotionally. They
Yeah.
require more patience. They require more focus. This is not that this isn't that in some ways, because it is, you know, like it is so beautifully made, but it's also just fun. It's
Yeah.
fun, Matt.
It's not often you get all that, art house cinema, but also populist cinema, like just something that's fun, but also saying something that is like both, sexy and pulpy, but then also, yeah, artistic and
Has
yeah, it's
Apichatpong Vera set the coolest
yeah,
cinematographer who also
yeah,
shot Trap this year. It's like it has everything in this movie. Like it's such a full and rich experience. And again, like it's such a shame because it's like, I know it was an early release this year, but it should be up for every single award nomination
yeah.
humanly possible. This thing is
Yeah, Zendaya,
perfect.
both guys, direction, picture, score, cinematography, script, like you said, like it should be everywhere, and it's kind of baffling that it's not. But and I get maybe you could write it off as what we said of just like, oh, it's just it's a fun movie, like, and then I think that's maybe
And
how
recency
people.
bias.
Yeah, and unfortunately, if this came out, yeah, December 15th or something, then maybe we'd
Or
be.
it was
Yeah,
originally supposed to come out last year, but it was delayed
yeah,
because of the strikes, and it was
yeah,
supposed to, I think, premiere or open Venice.
yeah.
So I wonder in a what if
Yeah.
situation, if it came out last year.
Would we, yeah, would it have gotten a, you
Yeah.
know? And I think in being such a quote unquote personal opinion weak year, that this not being in the conversation, just I can't even with some the list of some of the things, like, in our top 10, you'll see a bunch of things that get nominated for Best Picture that weren't even in our honorable mentions, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just it's wild to me, and I think Challengers is amazing, and it had such a cultural moment, like, these are that is the movie that we should be championing, even just for nominations. It doesn't necessarily even have to win, but that rare thing that kind of bridges that gap between, cinephiles and populist cinema,
This is
right?
my Wicked.
Like, it really is, like, I just feel like it is that thing where you have people that aren't would not normally watch any Luca Guadagnino movie probably, but they saw Challengers, and it had that moment on social media, and it broke through and became like an iconic, I'd even argue, thing this year in 2024. And for us, not as a community to again, awards can be silly. They don't really mean much, but sometimes you're just like, man, this is something we should be celebrating.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll squeak through. I don't know. Like, it could, but
I think Score is it's one place where
yeah,
like if I were to bet anywhere, that would be it. But then even then, I don't know. I think like Luca Guadagnino's awards track record is so interesting to me because like Call Me by Your Name is the big kind of success that he's had. And then after that, like this year, like Daniel Craig might get in for Best Actor. He might get in the fifth slot. Like that's some people are like, oh, he'll get in because it's Daniel Craig and it's like
yeah.
a career honor. But then some people are like, oh, well, maybe Sebastian Stan will, but he's splitting the votes because of the two movies he's in. Or maybe Jesse Eisenberg surprises if they really like A Real Pain last minute. I think it'll be Daniel Craig, so that will go up for Luca directing two actors with Timothy Chalamet for Call Me by Your Name and for Daniel Craig. But it's so interesting with that guy's career because he has made so many movies in the last 5-6 years, and like he has a movie coming out next year or this year coming up, and so for him to just keep going and like just go from one thing to another, but like the quality never dips. Like it doesn't feel like Challengers loses anything because Luca's been working nonstop, and like even Queer doesn't feel like the
Yeah.
quality has dipped in any way whatsoever because he went from Challengers to Queer, and now he's going from Queer to After the Hunt, and so
And then doing that Sergeant Rock movie, isn't he,
yeah, and
for
then
like,
also an American Psycho
oh yeah.
reboot, and then he's got there was something else that he announced that he's got a Lord of the Flies film that he's been working on for years. Oh, and he's got a film with Josh O'Connor called Separate Rooms that he's been
So
wanting to
there's
make.
5 things in the
Yeah,
pipeline.
my man is just like putting like Steven Soderbergh is like, dude, you got to slow down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So I've said my 2 and 1, which
Yeah,
are Challengers and The Brutalist. So I don't need to say much more. Love both of those movies. They went back and forth this entire year. I could even say they both tied for number 1 if I really
it just
wanted to.
depends on the day, right?
Yeah,
Too
it,
like
it depends on what mood I'm in. If you gun to my head, what am I watching right now? Probably Challengers, but like I love both movies, and I think they fight back and forth this whole year. And ask me next week, it could be Challengers number 1. Ask me the week after, it could be Brutalist number
that's why
1.
lists
So,
are silly, right? Because
yeah.
they're changing so much.
Oh, and years later, my list changed. What has staying power? What stays with you? Like it's evolving. But in this moment, that's my 2 and 1. So you might as well go over 2 and 1
Yeah,
together.
yeah, and I'll
Um,
try to go through them quick because
no, they're your favorite movies of the year. Take
no,
your
I
time,
know.
man.
I think we've
Oh, it's a
talked
3-hour podcast. People want this,
yeah.
don't they? I
Well,
don't know.
we've talked about Honora a lot in terms of the polarizing aspect on this podcast, but Honora is number 2, and for the longest time, I thought it would be number 1. Like Challengers was like my number 1 for such a long time, and then I saw Honora, and then after Honora, I was like, oh, Honora is going to be it, and it felt like that for the longest period of time. But Sean Baker's just one of those filmmakers where, like George Miller, he's continuing to follow the themes and ideas that he has pursued about fringe communities and people on the outside that you wouldn't either think about or even give the time of day if you saw them in the real world, and finding an observational perspective on it all and looking, to have a conversation and to let the people that he is interested in have a chance to show you their experience. And with Honora, the world of an escort and sex worker, you feel as though he is immersing you in a world that he has taken the time to research and understand through people that he cares about, and letting them tell their story through him. And so when you're watching this film, which in my opinion has the best performance by any actor this year in Mikey Madison playing the titular Honora, Annie,
Annie.
I I think that casting is such an important thing for movies, and it can really make or break. Like, I think if Mikey Madison was not in this role and you had cast a movie star in this part, like
Trying
somebody
to
that
do
was
that accent and stuff like
somebody
that.
that was well known. Not to say that like Mikey Madsen's not a good actor before, because obviously she's done good work, and like, Scream 5, she's a lot of fun, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, she's got the credentials and she's good at what she does. But this is her breakout role. This is her year. This is a definitive performance from an actor, because most actors in their careers are always looking for those roles, the roles that maybe that will haunt them a little bit, or they'll get sick of. Like, you think Harrison Ford has Indiana Jones and Han Solo, or you think like Jeff Bridges has The Big Lebowski, like roles that are like truly like, when you think
can't
of an
imagine
actor,
them as anyone else. Yeah.
or association. Like, anytime you say like an actor's name, it's like, oh, that's the role, that's the performance of their career, or that's the thing I know them from the most. And this is that too. Like, this is that performance, that character that feels completely real, that exists in the film, but also has a life even outside of the movie. Like, when we follow her story, it feels like she had a life beforehand. She's not just simply a film character created for this story. And I think with that, like, honestly, that's very rare to do and to create. And, we've talked about it, and I know that you had some frustrations with the sort of one major set piece taking so long, but I love the way that it continually builds on it and is challenging it and makes it both very much anxiety inducing, but kind of has a screwball comedy aspect. But you're still worried about Honora in that moment, because we really don't know too much about the three henchmen, the two Russians, and the one Armenian, coming together and working together on sort of, working on the behalf of the parents of Yvonne. And so with that relationship, I find really fascinating. You have really great supporting performances. Yuri Borisov is getting a lot of nominations for his supporting work that's very subtle and is a supporting performance. Like, this is the thing as well that I find like really important in talking about like what a supporting performance is versus a lead, because you have an actor like Kieran Culkin who is great in the movie. It's nothing against the performance itself, but this is where I do feel like, traditionally speaking, supporting actors are usually character actors or international actors, or people that are in a movie for a certain amount of time that aren't in the film consistently.
It's very much Madison's movie, and he supports her in his
well, he doesn't even show up until much later in the film.
And to jump in quickly, if I'm going to say something positive, on my second watch, his performance was the thing that stood out the most to me. Something that I didn't necessarily latch onto first watch. Very sleep deprived, came in after a vacation on very little sleep, watched that movie. It didn't work for me. Rewatched it since. I'll quickly give my thoughts. Really like the first act, and then it kind of loses me in that sequence you've already mentioned. And then the second half of the movie, I just don't really vibe with. But his performance, I will say, the second time I watched it, it is very subtle. It's very, you have to just watch him in the background and watch his face and just his interactions. And he is excellent. He is fantastic. Mikey Madison's excellent too, but I don't even need to.
We
Kind
already
of,
all know that. Like, even if you don't
yeah,
like the movie, I think like most people are like, she is
yeah.
amazing in
The
it.
movie doesn't work, but she's perfect
Yeah.
casting. I completely agree with you. And he is the thing that stood out. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, and I just love that like Sean Baker. It's funny because like I love this movie so much, but I also really love Red Rocket and I love the Florida Project. I've loved everything that he's done that I have
Same,
seen.
man.
And it's always interesting when you have a filmmaker that has had a building reputation, especially with art house crowds or indie crowds, and being considered one of the great American filmmakers working today and getting great performances. Like Simon Rex should have been nominated and won every award that year for Red Rocket. In the same
Justice for Scary Movie.
Well, in the same way that like the Florida Project, even though like Willem Dafoe got nominated for supporting actor, like that is such a great movie. And then like Tangerine's great. Like he's done great work. And it's just always interesting to see when like the mainstream catches up with somebody you've already known is great for so long. And then like I also understand, and this maybe sounds more contrarian, but I also do get when like you almost feel like the thing that you've loved so much for so long and then everybody else discovers it and it's like no longer yours. And so like
Brady Corbet.
I can see that backlash a little bit with, I think Corbet will be that with his next movie. I think
Yeah,
like
I agree.
everybody will be jumping over his next film in the way where like Baker, like it felt like he just needed like Honora was like the jumping film.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Tangerine was like the film that was the first movie of his I saw, and then I went back and watched Starlet, and then I picked up Takeout on when Criterion released it. I still haven't seen Prince of Broadway in Four Letter Words, which I think are getting remastered physical releases sometime this year. But you watch the films, and it felt like little by little he was kind of like bridging the gap between you know art house sentimentality kind of filmmaking that is not for everyone, but still like has a voice to kind of like finding like that commercial compromise in a way.
Yeah.
And this is like that movie for him, which is still very weird to think that like Honora is considered a best picture contender and Mikey Madison is fighting with I think like Demi Moore now for best actress. So
That's
um
wild. Yeah.
it is interesting in that way. But yeah, like is it my favorite of Sean Baker's movies? I don't know. Like I think maybe Tangerine is my favorite of his, but I also love Red Rocket so much. And
And I love
yeah,
Florida Project. Yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
love Tangerine for the iPhone cinematography. I think is really interesting too to make that work. I'll be really curious to see that in 28 years later next year too. But
Well,
that's
could you
always
imagine
something.
Tangerine like as a 28 days later revisit kind of thing? Like we come
I'm
back
just
30
saying,
years
like, you
later.
don't see a lot. Like, I appreciate those swings of going an iPhone can be
And he's a film purist too. And so
yeah,
for him
yeah.
to do that in like that Steven Soderbergh kind of way to be like, I just want to make this movie and this is how I can do it. Is there's just something about that adds like a little bit extra to be like, oh man, I just really love that this is a guy and he loves film. Like he knows what he's talking about. He
I love the
knows.
guy, even if
Yeah.
if this didn't completely work for me. I got it more on that second watch why people like it.
Yeah.
That second half loses me. Like
I get
dude,
that.
that first half I'm like all in. I love
But
everything
then
up until
you see Mark Edelstein playing with a remote controller like a
oh, that is egregious. As someone who plays video games, yeah, that kind of rips you out of it. But I do understand the love for it.
yeah.
I love Sean Baker. It just unfortunately, uh, even on I gave it another shot. I tried to go in with an open mind and watch it, and I found myself really enjoying it more the second time. But then it hits a point, and Nevis felt the same way, where it just kind of loses me. Like, and it's not even like there's a moment I can describe. It's that might be that sequence in the foyer of the mansion, in the living room. But that whole second half, the slapsticky element,
Well, the all-nighter.
the all-nighter, it got a little some of my problems with Fury Road, it just gets samey to me of these people running around going, "Have you seen this boy? Have you seen this boy? Have you seen this boy?" And like over and over and over again to the point where I'm like, "All right, let's fucking get this going." And then like it it loses me somewhere in the "Have you seen this boy?" Second half that
That was the original title of the movie.
Have you seen
Have
this
you seen
boy?
this
Yeah.
boy? I don't know. I love that stuff because I love it as a hangout movie. Like I love
Yeah, I
all-nighter
get it. I
films as
just
well.
yeah.
And like it's such a weird thing in terms of like I talked to Sean Baker about this. Those three guys in any other movie would be portrayed as one-dimensional characters that wouldn't even really like they would just kind of like almost be like window dressing like for the big bad, right? Like they would just be like,
Yeah.
oh, they've got like a crew of
The
villains
henchmen guys,
and maybe they
yeah.
have like an interesting look or something like that. But they're developed in a way that feels like they're given so much more interior life and personality, like even to the point of like Yura Borisov being muscle and being so reluctant to do any of this
Yeah.
and to be like, I don't really want to.
But I have to. He's trapped in a similar
Yeah.
situation too,
And
right?
those
Where
guys
he
at the end, like when the marriage is being, spoiler alert, I guess, when the marriage is being annulled, like they look at that and they're like, man, I feel like they're envious of Annie in that moment
that
because
she
like
can get out.
she can get
Yeah.
out, but we can't. We're still we're married to life to this family,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we do not want to be here.
And that's the stuff I do like. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and the
So
ending, I think the ending is
ending is
phenomenal.
devastating. It's great. Yeah.
Like that's like really why like I think a lot of people are talking about it. Like if you have a great ending for a film, like that's the thing people remember the most.
You
And
need to have it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that will give you that lasting.
And I'm gonna be honest as well. This is completely transparent, and I actually want to mention this on the show because I don't think I've talked about it on the show. I've talked about it to a lot of people. Honora has such
How is your best friend now?
yes, yeah. Honora has a very weird place in my heart that I will always remember because I've had such a wild ride with this movie in terms of so I did an interview back in September for the film, and I thought I completely bombed the interview. It was a 3-on-1, and originally it was supposed to be Sean Baker and Mikey Madison, and I didn't really originally know that it would
Eric
be.
tends to do this, everyone, just so I can interject.
Yeah.
Eric tends to call me in a panic,
Oh
being
boy.
like, Matt, I'm fucking quitting.
I'm
I'm the worst film journalist you've ever like. I'm terrible. My interview went horrible. It was embarrassing. And then I watch back the interview and I call him usually and I go, the fuck are you talking about? It was fine. Like at worst, it's fine. At best, it was very good. Anyways, continue your story.
Yeah, and so basically that's what I did. I almost canceled my David Cronenberg interview because I felt
Thank God
that,
you didn't.
that this went awful. So what happened was I thought that it was originally going to be Sean Baker and Mikey Madison. I didn't know the setup for it either, so I didn't know if it was going to be 1-on-1 or 2-on-1.
Which
And
is
then-
tough when you're doing interviews,
especially during a festival as well, because you're not as coherent. I was literally running from the Heretic interviews that I did over
Right.
to Elevation for Honora. You know, this is like very privileged as well, and I don't want to seem like I'm so inconvenienced and all that. I get it. Like I'm very lucky to be talking to people that I admire, and I love talking to creative people. But then I was told like last minute that they brought in Yura Borisov and that we were putting him in. So I didn't really have anything prepared for him per se. Anyways, I do the interview, and the first question I asked Sean Baker, I kind of felt like, oh, did I say it the wrong way or did it sound insulting? And it was basically asking him about like why he decided to go solo in terms of writing the script, because everything
You guys
else
can go and watch the interview. Yeah.
yeah. Everything he's done other than 4-letter words, he's written with somebody else. And the way that he reacted to it is like, oh, I don't like, I almost felt like I was just asking a dumb question, or it was a question he just couldn't really answer. And then the next question, and I asked to, Mikey Madison, and it was kind of like I was trying to jump off of her so her and Yuris Borisov could have a conversation about their work together, if there was something that they noticed in each other's work that wasn't in the script or maybe was in the moment, or even something the way that you were talking about that you saw Yuris Borisov's performance clearly
a subtle moment or something.
Yeah. And she didn't understand the way that I was maybe saying it or phrasing it or what have you. So I felt like, oh God, like just like literally.
You just had to repeat the question and it was fine.
No, I know. But at that moment I was like, God, like just throw me in outer space. And so with that, I was like, oh, this is the worst day. And then like you calmed me down. A couple other people calmed me down as well.
The only thing I had to edit in that interview was I cut out the first time you asked the question, and I just that wasn't even because I was just like, I can save time by just only showing the.
Anyways, the rest of the day I was just literally having like this like self-destructive meltdown, panic attack, existential crisis thing. And it's so funny because like we're sitting in the theater about to watch Megalopolis, and 2 minutes before the movie starts, my phone vibrates and I pull it out, and then I see that Sean Baker started following me on Instagram. And then 2 seconds later I see these two giant paragraphs in my DMs from him, and I won't read what he said, but um it was so funny because Matt's just like, holy fuck, Sean Baker's trolling you now. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
after the movie, I read it, and it was a very nice, thoughtful response and saying like, oh, he wasn't ready for that because nobody's asked him the question. And this is kind of like, obviously the film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, but like this is like the first time like he's done junkets, and I said to him like, maybe this is just like my style of interview is more like conversational, so it's not like
It is.
traditionally.
It doesn't lend. I don't mean this derogatory,
No,
but
I
like
I totally get
it
this.
doesn't lend itself well sometimes to a 4 to 5 minute junket style interview. Your questions are almost, I this is a compliment, like too good to be like in a, oh sorry, my dinner is ready. But I yeah, I mean that in a way. Sometimes they throw people off because they're not expecting it. And I think in a junket style, they're more expecting
What is
those
this
lob
movie
the
about? What was
lob
it like
ball.
working with so and
It's
so?
almost like it could be, a criticism. Some people might go, okay, you have to know how much time you have, so you're asking questions where it throws someone off because they're not expecting it, because they know you only have 4 minutes, so they're not expecting you to give them an answer where they might have to think about it or give you a longer answer. So it's a balance. It's a hard thing to do, right? Junkets are
Yeah.
hard, and that's why I don't do them anymore. Is because like I applaud people who can do it and do it well, because they play the game, they know what game they're playing, they do it. But I love podcasting, as we're 3 hours and 4 minutes into this, where I would much rather
We're almost as
have,
long as The Brutalist.
yeah, we should try to go 3.5 hours. I'll put in a 15-minute intermission in
Sure.
the middle of this.
It'll be a
Um,
photo of just me and you, like, staring at, like, the
yeah.
screen.
Um, I forget where I was gonna go with this, but like it's just
But it's a different beast in terms of, like,
yeah.
yeah, I totally get it. It's one of those things where, like, I love talking to people that make movies. Like, I love
Yeah.
it, but I also hate the anxiety that it brings me in terms of, like,
Yeah.
research and how to approach it,
For
and
4
like,
minutes, right?
yeah, and even how, because I'm not an, like, that's the thing I've always gotten with some people, is that like, oh, you kind of have to be like an actor, right? Because you have to like memorize things, or it's like, no, I'm not. I'm a film critic and a reporter, journalist type second, and like I'm not an actor, so I'm not going to memorize questions. Like I have things like what I always think about movies. Like I'm not ever not thinking
Well, you
about
have such an
movies.
encyclopedic sort of mind. I think you know what you want to talk about, so you don't necessarily need to. And I think for you, it even throws you off when you try to refer to questions,
Yes,
and you're better off just knowing the things you want to
raw
talk
dogging
about.
it
And
basically.
yeah, we're both just big raw doggers. So, anyways, yeah, Sean
WWE raw
Baker.
doggers.
Sean Baker and you are best friends now. You guys read it, and there's a second interview you guys can watch with Eric, and or listen to with
Listen to,
Eric
yeah.
and Sean Baker, and now you guys
So
are best friends.
yeah,
So
so
you'll have a cameo in whatever movie he does
it
next.
does
And
next. Yeah, I'll be like some sleazy pimp or something. I don't know. So I think like that as well like adds to Honora for me in a way where it's like,
there's
oh, this
this.
has like a weird personal connection
Hey,
that
I
I was
yeah
never that I would have never thought would happen with any
yeah.
movie or any filmmaker for that matter, in terms of, and I'm not saying like, oh, we're buddies now in the sense of like I can call him up or like message him anytime.
You
It's just
could
more
DM
so.
him and he would probably answer you,
Oh,
I would
definitely,
say.
definitely. Like
Yeah.
I would, like I would not hesitate to like, for the next movie or something, like to reach out. But like I also still respect boundaries and things like that, and I don't want to take that for granted that like it like that he's following me and things like that, and I don't want to simply be like, oh, I can call him up
No, there's a
anytime.
fine
It's not like
balance of
you,
not
right?
being
Where
weird
I
about it,
can
right?
text
Yeah.
you and call you
There's
anytime.
a fine balance of
Yeah,
the parasocial, but you still have
exactly.
a you still have a personal connection because of this thing, but don't be weird. Essentially, the advice you can give to anyone if they're
Yeah.
ever in a situation like this, don't be weird. Just
Yeah.
play it cool, play it normal like they're a human being, which is what everyone is. But yeah, Anora is I definitely am in
I'm
the
glad that you
minority. I'm
watched it
glad
again.
you.
I'm
Yeah,
happy that you gave it that
I'm
second
glad I
shot.
did too because it was he's obviously a filmmaker I really really
Yeah,
love
you've liked all of his other stuff.
and I knew what kind of mood I was in that morning of being sleep deprived, and sometimes it doesn't lend well to a reaction. Not like they're close at all, but I remember when we saw Encanto on pulling an all
Oh
nighter,
god.
and we
We went
took a
to,
we took
Sunrise
a
too, right?
our
Or Sunset.
Sunset Grill.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We did an all nighter. We took the red eye from LA. Um, and I think we were doing stuff that day before. I didn't sleep a fucking lick on the plane. And we were like, you want to just, there was an Encanto press screening. So we stayed up all night. We got breakfast at sunset and then we saw Encanto. And I was in and out of consciousness. It was like a
I
fever
was
dream.
chewing gum through the whole thing to
Yeah.
keep me awake. I've never
And
chewed gum so hard.
and I remember just being so indifferent over that movie, and, I've gone back and revisited Encanto, and I absolutely love Encanto. So it's one of those things of, like, your state of mind and your being can really affect how you see a film. So with Anora, I was very sleep deprived, maybe grumpy even, and I remember, going, "I gotta give this another shot." So I rewatching it, and I liked it more, don't get me wrong. It went from, like, a 2.5 to a 3 to me. Like, I give it a soft pass. Like, I think it's still, it's well made and everything. It just didn't really vibe with me. So, but I know I'm in the minority. Okay, let's get to it. This is the moment you've all been waiting for. I think from what we've talked about, you can maybe gather what Eric's number one is, and I'm really curious to hear about it because it's a movie that I really, really do want to watch. I just haven't yet. So, Eric, go finish off the episode with your number one film of the year.
Craven the Hunter.
God,
No, it's
imagine.
well, because you said
Imagine.
like, oh, you've been hinting at it, and we've been
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
Craven the Hunter. No, it's interesting because I've watched it twice now, once theatrically and once at home. And I will say that as the movie expands, see it theatrically because I think it is the way that you will give your time and focus to watching the film because it
It's playing
is
in 35 millimeter at TIFF, which is what I
ooh,
wanna do.
ooh baby. Because it is a challenging movie. It is a tough film to watch. I'm not even talking about the subject matter per se. I'm talking about the filmmaking because what Nickel Boys does, Ramel Ross's adaptation of Colson Whitehead's novel that he co-wrote with Jocelyn Barnes, that is being released by Warner Brothers Canada here, Amazon and Orion in the US, and is a Plan B production, is that it challenges and deconstructs the way that you watch movies or how you've been taught or instructed to watch films. And so when you're watching a story that's based on this nonfiction novel about the Dozier School for Boys in Florida in the 1960s and how African American boys are discriminated against, horribly treated to the point of death, violence enacted upon bodies and people being buried, and actually having to deal and look at America's complicity in terms of what we've dealt with and what we've done. I'm not talking about American, like obviously we're Canadians. Some people want us to be Americans, but even with reform schools in Canada and what Canada has been responsible for when it comes to First Nations and communities and cultures. This movie confronts those issues, but also recontextualizes filmmaking. And it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I I don't want to make a claim and think like Matt won't like it or dislike it, but I do see like if you aren't a fan of Terrence Malick's movies or a Pitchapong Virasethakul's films, it still has a linear thread to it all. about this relationship between these two black boys that are wrongly imprisoned and having to find solidarity between each other in order to survive this school. But it's all from this POV perspective. And I don't want to call it just POV because it's not just simply point of view. The way that Ramel Ross describes it, it's more of like a sentient camera. It's an organ, a part of the character's body in the way that they're looking out at the world and the shifting perspective. It does cheat a little bit because it brings in archival footage and elements from history in order to show you like what is going on historically in the time that this narrative is taking place, but also in the context of American history when these schools were being looked at for what they were, which is a place of mass murder and genocide. And so there's so much going on, and it's not a movie that, again, I've watched it twice. It's hard to watch. And even like I had a tough time adjusting initially to the style of Jomo Frey's cinematography, because it does feel almost like you're not looking at it from like the perspective of a camera. You're looking at it from the perspective of the human eye and how the human eye sees and how the human eye presents the image, or it's at least trying to replicate that. And it's also even having a conversation, something that I cannot speak to, but it's having a conversation about how people of color, specifically black men and women, have been portrayed in film, and how it deals with trauma and how that is portrayed when you put a camera in front of it, and how manipulation and subjugation changes those things. And so when you're watching this movie, it's having a conversation with those kinds of films and with the past and how we portray these things, in the same way that I think something like as recent as The Zone of Interest is having that conversation with how the Holocaust has been portrayed in film, and what responsibility do you have, and also letting characters be human beings and let them have moments of levity and live in the moment and have fun, but also have sorrow, but not just simply be traumatizing somebody to emotionally manipulate them. And so there's a lot going on there, and I'm not articulating this well because it's almost a hard movie to like truly convey what this movie can conjure when you're watching it. It's unlike anything else I've seen this year, and it just really feels like it's trying to take something that we've all known our entire lives, which is how a movie is made, how it's presented, and try to break that down and trying to say like, oh, well, there are other ways to move filmmaking forward. And how do you see the world? And how do you see the world through film? And for that, like, I am so grateful to be reminded that film can still be not only challenging, but like it's not defined by one thing. And yeah, this is just like unlike anything I have seen this year. I was not expecting this to be my number one movie, and it's a weird film as well because it's a film that like on paper, on the surface, like it's like, oh, you have a documentary filmmaker who's being brought in to make something that is commercial. It might add a little bit of their own style into it, but they're wanting to make something that will be an awards player.
Yeah.
This is not that at all. Like, that's the thing that I'm shocked by. Like, you're watching this movie and you would swear that this would be something, and I don't want to discourage people by me saying this. This is something that you're watching and you're thinking, am I watching a Wavelengths film?
Interesting.
And that is going to turn off a lot of people.
But if you get on its wavelength, then you're probably
Yes,
gonna,
exactly.
yeah.
And that's why I was like, man, this is like I remember last year, including myself, like we all talked about Barbie being a Trojan horse movie in the sense of, like it's this commercial polished film, but it has a lot to say about feminism, and solidarity and that intersection of being an ally and things like that. This movie truly is a Trojan horse film because it feels like, okay, you have a big studio releasing this film that isn't even like necessarily like an art house film on like an A24 or Neon level. Like it really is unlike anything else that a studio has released in quite some time. And it's like, like I equate it to like, it's like broccoli with cheese on it. The cheese is like the prestigious nature of like it being based on a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. You have someone like Ingenue Ellis Taylor in a small role as the grandmother of the lead. But like underneath the surface, like this is going to be for a lot of people like their first experimental movie ever.
Cool. I
So
love that.
yeah,
I
it's a window into a new world in a way.
I can't wait to see it. I really do want to see it. And I'm going in with an open mind and everything that you've said, like I'm prepared for it. So
Yeah.
I think I've held off watching it on a screener for some of the reasons that you've said. I feel like it is a movie I need to be locked in
You
and
got to
watch.
meet
Like,
it at
yeah.
the
And I
watching it on the
don't
big
think
screen.
I'm giving it a fair shot. Like, I'm sure I can, pay attention and watch on a screener. But I think going to TIFF, it's playing Lightbox, like I think is the right way to go, and that's amazing. I didn't expect it to be your number one either. I knew just because I know what your favorite movies of the year are, and I knew coming up that it was going to be your number one. But I think even when I saw when you initially put it on your list, that it beat out Challengers, that it beat out um,
Nora
Brutalist,
and the Brutalist, yeah.
yeah, that I was like, holy shit,
And
okay,
Craven the
cool, like,
Hunter. She's
yeah, and Craven the
incidentally.
Hunter, yeah. So I'm really, really looking forward to watching it, and that's it won Toronto's Film Critics Association's Best Picture
Yeah, yeah,
too.
and it
So
also won Ramel Ross directing. What award was it? Was it L.A. or it was some sort of like prestigious film body that
cool,
won it, and it is like being considered for best picture, and I think like it is the best direction of any movie I've seen this year. I love Brady Corbet, don't get me wrong, but I think like Brady Corbet is all about like the present and the past, where Ramel Ross is about the past and what the future could be. And
interesting,
and also like it is, like it is tough subject matter, and it's like for a lot of people like it feels like a chore to bring yourself to watch something like this, but you will be rewarded by
yeah.
the incredible filmmaking, by what it is doing, and like I think what's that food that like for some people it does taste like soap.
Cilantro, yeah,
Cilantro. Like I think it's almost like the equivalent of cilantro in a way. Like I know that some people just will not like it because the technique
just
is
as it doesn't work
so.
for them, yeah, or it's yeah.
Yeah, and I get that, and, like, Matt, if you do
Bold.
not like
It's
this
bold,
movie,
right.
that's
You
fine.
wouldn't be surprised. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, but it's also doesn't take anything away from it.
yeah,
That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to checking it out. I really, really am.
yeah. Oh,
Uh,
and speaking of Craven the Hunter, Fred Hechinger is in Nickel Boys.
is he?
He is, yeah,
Love that guy. Love that guy. What a career that guy. There was that one year where he was in everything, but he's also kind of in everything every year. So,
yeah.
really good character actor. In
A
some great
chameleon,
stuff
if you
and
will.
some not so great stuff. Yeah. Well, thank you all. If you've lasted this long, whether it took you 3 hours and 20 minutes or if it took you a week and a half to listen to this, we really do appreciate it. That was one of our longest episodes ever, but I think
Brutalist length.
when you're looking back at an entire year, I think it's worthy. We'll quickly go through our top 10s just to wrap things up. Here's my 10: Quiet Place Day 1, 9, Will and Harper, 8, Transformers 1, 7, Long Legs, 6, Flow, 5, Better Man, 4, A Real Pain, 3, Dune Part 2, 2, Challengers, and 1, The Brutalist. Eric, go ahead with yours.
My top 10 are The Beast, All We Imagine as Light, I Saw the TV Glow, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, Evil Does Not Exist, No Other Land, The Brutalist, Challengers, Honora, and Nickel Boys.
I think it's a good group of movies. I think some overlap, obviously, and I think a lot of the movies I mentioned you enjoyed, and vice versa.
Yep.
A
There was
lot that
one I
I,
was debating as well, and I don't know, maybe you felt the same way. Like, I didn't know what to do with Matthew Rankin's universal language,
yeah,
because to me, like, that would be on my top 5. this
wow.
year, but it would also but it's also not getting its theatrical release until the end of January
I
this
probably
year.
will keep it until next year. That's just a personal
Yeah.
choice, right? Like I still think you could keep that in the chamber for 2025s,
I don't
right?
disagree. And I also
Um,
could understand why people are putting it on this year is
yeah.
because it is Canada's
It
international
is.
submission
So
and
it's either whether you go by Oscar rules, if you go by awards rules, if you
or
go by
festival rules
theatrical, festival rules. I like to go by when people are going to see things.
by the
So if I
actual
put
theatrical
yeah,
release.
because like if I put it on this year, it might get forgotten because like I don't know, or it's the good timing because it comes out in a month, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, special shout out we'll give Universal Language because it's one that we both really, really loved. And on the TV front, I want to give a shout out to X-Men 97. That
Oh
fucking
yeah.
kicked ass this year. I don't know what else on the TV
Traders, you've been
front,
watching
but
a lot of reality TV
oh
shows.
yeah, a pop culture Jeopardy is great. If anyone like, I know it's just Jeopardy, but it's pop culture. It's great. I don't know, but I wanted to give a special shout out to X-Men 97 if we're shouting out an X-Men thing this year because you didn't hear from Deadpool and Wolverine on either of our
Well, also just the
lists.
best superhero
Thing,
related
yeah.
thing, you know. And I think honestly, like, man, I wish more, like we talked about this with Spider-Verse as well. I just wish more superhero stuff was like that. Like I would always be rooting for it, you know.
I'm
If there
looking
were like,
forward to the Spider-Man show. I think I'm curious to see how that works and stuff like that. But we'll talk about what's to come on another episode that will probably also be 3 hours long. Who knows?
hell yeah.
Um, thank you all once again. If you stuck it out this long, we love you. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back soon with our most anticipated films of 2025. We will do I always have a blast doing this episode where Eric and I go in planning nothing, but we go through every single movie that might come out
It's our
next
version of
year.
draft day.
Yeah, we kind of draft movies, we make a list, and then we pare it down to usually we kind of be
The
cheeky
year
and
that
the
it's
year we
yeah.
do 25 for 25, 24 for 24, that kind of thing. So we'll be doing 25 films to look forward to that are most anticipated, and then we'll look back at last year's list, see if we nailed it, if some were disappointing, all that kind of stuff. We'll also have an episode soon about my trip to WWE Raw, the premiere on Netflix in LA. That will be coming soon for you guys. I'll do an episode of our blockbuster bucket list on Disneyland and Universal will be coming. We'll have reviews for some films coming out in January, like Wolfman, and and
My
I don't
name's
know if
Bob
anything
Wolfman.
else, but
I think
Wolfman, I
Companion is a movie we
yeah,
should talk about.
Companion, I do really want to see as
Yeah.
well. Those are two standout in the horror adjacent kind of very different, but that I'm looking forward to. And yeah, so those will probably be spread out over the month. You'll get this episode this week. It's so big. We'll probably put out most anticipated next Monday because and then you might get the raw you'll get the raw episode as kind of like a mini episode, probably sometime later, this week, before that most anticipated, and then you'll get the other ones kind of throughout the month of January. So thank you. We will put both of our lists up on Letterboxd. They are on our personal Letterboxd, but I will make sure that I put them on the Untitled_movies page on Letterboxd. We will be updating that consistently this year, so please go follow us over there if you haven't, as well as on Blue Sky, untitledmoviepodcast.com, all your favorite podcast services, YouTube, all that jazz. So we really, really do appreciate it. You can find me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck. You can find Eric at EM6211, but on Blue Sky, he's Eric Marchin. And then you can follow Eric's reviews and other things on rogerstv.com/cinema scene.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly say thank you, Matt,
No,
for
we have no
posting
time left.
the interviews that I've been
Yeah.
sending your way.
Please
So
go listen and watch those too.
yeah, so like in terms of like even just thinking about back to this year, I have interviews with Robbie Williams and Michael Gracie for Better Man. I have interviews with Sean Baker, Mikey Madison, and Yura Borisov for Honora, Brady Corbet for The Brutalist, even stuff that we didn't put on our lists, but had been a part of the awards conversation, like The Seed of the Sacred Fig with Mohammed Rozaloff. Really thoughtful conversation and really kind of him to spend that interview talking about what it was like to make a movie like that. So, like there's a lot of good stuff. My interview with Tim Fellbaum will be up for September 5 this week, as well as you're listening to this. And I've got a couple things hopefully in the works for this month. So we're trying to combat the January blahs with, some fun stuff and make it very, battle the seasonal depression of it all.
As I'm eating my dinner. That's how long we've been recording. Thank you all. Until next time.
Can't wait for Kraven the Hunter 2. That'll be my number one film of 2027.
Bye, everybody.